Chapter 10-11. Once Hang Yuyan got rid of her thoughts, there was no longer any emotional disturbance. She was still like a pool of stagnant water. From the outside, she looked like a clay sculpture. Unspecified currency at this moment, even if her divine soul was really devoured, she would only watch coldly as her own body died, and would not feel the slightest bit of fear or panic. If it was a normal external demon that relied on distracting thoughts to survive, once the source was cut, she would have been killed. But the heavenly demon was different. Even if she couldn't attack the 7 emotions and 6 desires, she could still invade the soul. Moreover, Sima Quan was from the Devil's sect and was proficient in the art of phase reversal. Since he had already invaded her body, as long as there was no external disturbance, he would be able to devour her soul and win this round. Just now, he had miscalculated. He thought that by heavily injuring her, he would be able to gain the upper hand and slowly deal with her. He didn't expect the people from the heavenly abode to be so difficult to deal with. Not only did he not achieve his goal, he even fell into a stalemate that he didn't want to see. For the sake of his grand plan, he only left a strand of devil chi in the spirit cave. If this place was destroyed, that place could absorb spiritual vigor and revive. But doing so would cause quite a commotion, and the Pingdu sect cultivators might notice it. Then, it would be hard for him to stay there safely. If the people of Donghua knew that he had suffered a setback, there was no guarantee that they wouldn't hit him while he was down. Before he could recover, they would eliminate him. Therefore, he felt that he had no way out. He could only fight with all his might and see who could hold on first. In Fengxiang Sword Sect, Gan Shouting was giving pointers to his sect's Dao skills when he suddenly saw a spiritual light flying towards him. He took a look and his expression froze. He waved his hand and said, "All of you, go down quickly." A few disciples saw that his expression wasn't right, so they quickly bowed and went down the peak. With a loud rumble, the spiritual light landed on the peak of the mountain. It was a bronze cauldron, and a female cultivator was sitting cross-legged inside. "Yuyan?" Gan Shouting was shocked. He immediately looked towards Kuexian's direction and saw that Hang Yuyan's spiritual vigor was still there. However, it was weakening. It was getting weaker and weaker. It was obvious that it had encountered something dangerous. Although he was anxious, he was not in a hurry to move. Instead, he was thinking about the reason behind it. His expression was solemn. Although Hang Yuyan's aura had changed, it wasn't a sign of qi deviation. Instead, it was an attack from an external enemy. It was just that she could be subdued without a sound, so she had no choice but to send her physical body to call for help. The other party's cultivation must be extremely high, and it would be difficult for them to defeat him alone. Thinking of this, he shook his hand and sent a letter to Qing Xian's sect. Not long after, a brilliant light shone from outside before fading away. A young man walked in with a face full of impatience. While walking she shouted, "Gan Shouting, I have already said that this is not a small matter. Give me some time to think it over. Why are you in such a hurry?" Gan Shouting didn't argue with him. He pointed at the cauldron and said, "Dao brother Ji, look." When Ji Xiangping saw this, her expression immediately changed. He looked up into the sky and saw that Hang Yuyan's spiritual vigor was getting weaker and weaker. He stomped his foot. "What are you waiting here for? Hurry up and follow me to save them." Immediately, a strong wind rose up. When Gan Shouting saw this, he let out a breath and followed on his spiritual light. At the same time, within the floating celestial palace of Qinsang School, a red light overflowed and spewed out. Then, the spiritual light swirled and flew towards the same place. The change in spiritual vigor was felt by all the people with high cultivation in Donghua continent, and they immediately looked over. After the spiritual light lingered for a long time, in one of the 3 high halls, Daylight Hall, a deep voice was heard. That voice said, "Spreading the yang fire to vermilion elixir, breaking through the Xian Ming scarlet fire yuan, refining the mortal body from the mortal world, and the golden sun shines brightly." When the voice finished, a loud sound was heard. Then, a dharma rose from the Daylight Hall, like a rising elixir sun. It shone brightly, and the clouds in the sky shone with a golden radiance. After a while, a blazing fire flew towards the sky wall and chased after the golden aura like a prairie fire. In an instant, the sky was dyed red, and thousands of miles of mountains and rivers were covered in a red glow. The Zenrins of the various sects who saw this had strange expressions on their faces. In the tens of thousands of years in Donghua continent, there had never been 13 Grotto Heaven Zenrins in one sect. It was a terrifying sight. The Dharma soared in the sky for more than 70 days before it slowly retracted. In the daylight hall, Huoxian slowly retracted his Dharma. He shook his sleeves, stood up, and walked out of the hall. The moment he walked out, he saw 2 disciples kneeling at the bottom of the stairs, motionless. They said in unison, "Congratulations on becoming a Grotto Heaven Jinren, and long life to Master." Huoxian said, "Get up." He then looked around. Ever since he married into the Chen family, he always felt like he was shackled and his steps were heavy. Now that he had broken the cage, he could run freely in this world. At this moment, he glanced around and saw a lonely paper crane flying over. It hovered in the corner of the hall. He was slightly startled and reached out to summon it. He held it in his palm and looked at it silently for a long time. He sighed softly and carefully put it into his pocket. After a while, a flying boat arrived. A boy stood on it and held a decree in his hands. He said loudly, "Jinren Hua, the sect leader Jinren has an order for you to enter the hall to meet him." Huoxian solemnly cupped his hands and said, "I will go now." With a shake of his body, he immediately turned into a golden light and flew away. In the blink of an eye, he landed outside the main hall. After reporting, he was called in. When he arrived inside, he saw 4 people sitting in the hall. Sect leader Qin was sitting in the middle. Above him, there was a Milky Way swirling. Qi Yuntian was next to him. Behind him, there were big waves rushing. On the first seat on the left was the Duzhen Hall Master, Zhang Yan. Behind him was a mass of chaotic underworld Xian Qi. Below him was Meng Zhen. There was no water around this Jinren, but the sound of surging water could be heard. Huoxian knew that the people here all had higher cultivation than him. So, he didn't dare to look too much. After a glance, he lowered his head and came forward to greet, "Disciple greets the sect leader Jinren." He then nodded to Meng Zhen and Qi Yuntian. Finally, he turned to Zhang Yan and solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Duzhen Hall Master, for sending the core jade." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's a small matter." Meng Zhen said, "Jinren Hua achieving Dharma is really a good thing for Qinsong. In Master's opinion, what should we call Dharma?" Sect leader Qin did not answer. He smiled and asked, "What does Duzhen Hall Master think?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "The sect leader will decide, it's not convenient for disciple to comment. Only the elders of the sect could name the Dharma of the Grotto Heaven cultivators." Even though he was Duzhen Hall Master, with the sect leader above him, it was not his turn to do this. Sect leader Qin thought for a while and said, "Jinren Hua practices the metal and fire dual techniques. You can inherit your previous name, Qi Shao Golden Sunday." Huoxian bowed deeply. Qi Yuntian pointed to an empty seat on his right and said, "Jinren Hua, please take a seat." Huoxian expressed his thanks and sat down. Above him was the main seat of the daylight hall. However, it was still empty at the moment. Qi Yuntian said, "Just now, sect leader Jinren and Duzhen Hall Master are talking about the sky demon. However, Jinren Hua has been in seclusion all these years, I think you still don't know about the sky demon." Huoxian said, "I would like to ask Xixiang." Qi Yuntian waved his sleeves and a divine light came down. Huoxian raised his finger and pointed at it. It entered his mind and he knew what was going on. Meng Zhen looked at him and said, "With the sky demon outside, the Jinren of the sects cannot sit still. Is Jinren Hua willing to help us get rid of this disaster?" Huoxian heard this and his expression changed. He looked up. Sect leader Qin was covered by the Milky Way and did not dare to look up. Meng Zhen and Qi Yuntian did not have any expression. He turned to look at Zhang Yan, only to see the latter nodding his head slightly. He thought for a while and immediately understood the meaning behind it. He was the hall master of the Daylight Hall. Now that he had become a grotto heaven, he should naturally become the hall master. However, the sect leader did not mention anything about it and instead talked about the sky demon. It was obvious that he wanted him to get rid of the sky demon. The Daylight Hall and Duzhen Hall, along with the upper extreme hall, controlled the three most important places in the sect. Disregarding cultivation, they were only below the sect leader in terms of position. To be able to sit on the hall master's position, he must first be able to convince the masses. However, comparing everything, he was far behind Zhang Yan in terms of his past achievements. Even if he managed to sit on the hall master's position, there would definitely be some criticism from the masses. The sky demon was wreaking havoc and everyone was afraid of it. If he could get rid of it, he would definitely gain the respect of the masses. He was sure that even if the sky demon did not appear, the sect leader would find another important task for him to do. After thinking about it, he knew what to choose. He immediately said, I am willing to use my heart to protect the Tao to kill this person and return the world to a bright and clear sky. Qi Yuntian nodded and turned to the side. He said, Sect leader Grand Master, since spiritual master Hua has such a righteous intention, we should not stop him. However, the sky demon is ever-changing and hard to predict. If he does not have a secret treasure, I'm afraid he would be fighting the scattered continents. It would be disadvantageous to me. Why don't we give him a treasure to help him? Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, in the Qin clan, there is a treasure called the 36 Peaks. It has the ability to level mountains and move oceans. Why don't we lend it to spiritual master Hua and help him get rid of the demon? Sect leader Qin said, let's do it. Zhang Yan smiled. With such a righteous cause, the Qin clan had to lend it to him even if they did not want to. Moreover, Hua Xian was the son-in-law of the Qin clan and was not considered an outsider. Now that he had become a cave, as long as the Qin clan was not blind, they would definitely try to form a good relationship with him. However, once this magic treasure was borrowed, it would not be so easy to return it. Hua Xian knew that this treasure had been refined by the Qin clan for thousands of years. It was only completed when Qin Taiping passed away, and its power was extremely great. If he could control it, his clan's ability in fights of magical powers would undoubtedly increase. When he returned after getting rid of the demon, he could use it to stabilize his position as the daytime palace master. An hour later, he returned to the hall and told the attendant, go and call spiritual master Qin here. The attendant was slightly bewildered. He bowed and said, may I ask which spiritual master Qin it is? Hua Xian said, it's naturally the mountain master of the 10 peaks. About 15 minutes later, Qin Feng arrived. When he entered the hall, he naturally congratulated Hua Xian. Hua Xian went straight to the point and said, I need to go out to kill the heavenly demon in the future, but I don't have a suitable treasure. I asked junior brother to come here to borrow the clan's treasure, the 36 peaks. I would like to ask you to go back and speak to the elders. Qin Feng could not help but be stunned. Hua Xian did not wait for him to answer. He stood up and turned around to return to the inner hall. He only left behind a sentence. When I sit in the main hall, junior brother can come to the hall to help me. Chapter 10-12. Qin Feng didn't let Hua Xian wait for too long. With his hard work, 3 days later, he personally delivered the 36 mountains to Hua Xian. Hua Xian sat within the hall as he stared at the magic treasure in his hand. With a rough glance, this thing was only a 30 centimeters tall prismatic gray stone that was inconspicuous. Only countless tiny pieces of gravel circled around it and emitted rustling sounds. Moreover, strands of faint and fine smoke were emitted from these rubbing sounds, and it was like clouds and mist coiled around it. But if one looked closely, they could see through the thin layer of clouds and see the mountains and plants inside. It was like a world in the palm, and the sound was the sound of the sea moving and the wind surging. When he married into the Qin clan in the early years, he'd heard his wife mention this treasure. This item was made by the Qin clan imitating the spiritual cliff treasure of the Yuxiao school. It took thousands of years and was only completed before Qin Taiping passed away. Once it was used, it could form a world of its own and drag the enemy inside, making it difficult to escape. It could also calm the mountains and move mana. With this magic treasure, he didn't have to worry too much when fighting with others. The next thing to do was to refine it. At this moment, a disciple on duty outside rushed in. The boy in the hall saw this and was very unhappy. He walked forward and said, "Quiet, why are you so flustered? Aren't you afraid of the hall master blaming you?" The disciple said softly, "Madam is here." The boy secretly looked back at Hu Xian and saw that he didn't even raise his head. Just as he didn't know what to do, footsteps came from outside. He saw a graceful woman with beautiful eyebrows and bright makeup walk in, and behind her were dozens of servants. After entering the hall, she turned around and gave an order. Everyone stood outside the hall, and only she walked towards the platform. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she bowed deeply. She said, "I respectfully congratulate my husband on achieving the heavenly abode and wish my husband a long life." Hu Xian placed the magic treasure on the table and walked down. He personally helped her up and said with a gentle tone, "Madam, please rise. There's no need to be so polite between us." Madam Qin saw that his expression was the same as before. There was no change. She heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. She glanced at him and said, "Husband, now that your seniority is different, you still have to be polite." Hu Xian said, "Madam is right." Madam Qin looked at the 36 mountains and said, "My husband, what do you think of this treasure?" Hu Xian said, "This treasure was refined by the members of your Qin clan for 1,000 years, so it's naturally extraordinary." Madam Qin grumbled, "Husband, in order to convince the elders, I have to go through a lot of trouble. This concubine has spent a lot of effort and has given away many good things." Hu Xian laughed, "Oh. Madam has contributed greatly." Madam Chen's beautiful eyes looked at his face and said in a joking tone, "Then how will my husband repay me?" Hu Xian's expression didn't change as he said, "Madam, tell me about it. As long as I can do it, I'll definitely do it." Mrs. Chen already had a plan in her mind. As soon as she heard his reply, she was about to say it out loud. But for some reason, when she saw Hu Xian's calm gaze, she hesitated for a moment and asked, "Husband, what do you think of Xiaozong and Jianming?" Hu Xian thought for a moment and said, "Their talents aren't bad, they're both dragons and phoenixes among men." Madam Chen's face was filled with anticipation. "Then can they become your disciple?" Hu Xian didn't even think about it. "Of course they can." He said, "Of course I can. Your husband also hopes to have a few capable subordinates under me. It would be best if they are my own family. One must know that the difference between the Duzhen Hall and the Daylight Hall's hall masters and the rest of the Grotto Heavens was that the sect had very few restrictions on them. Logically speaking, other than the orders of the sect master, they didn't need to listen to anyone else in the sect. Not only that, they were in charge of a small world and had a huge amount of pilled jades in their hands, so they could advance and retreat at will. Even if a war broke out in the sect, no one could do anything to them. The two halls also kept each other in check. When Qin Qingang ascended, his disciples fought for the position of sect master, causing internal strife. It wasn't that the aristocratic families didn't want to use this chance to replace him and change the situation of the sect master and disciple succession. However, at that time, the Daylight Hall master was afraid of the Duzhen Hall master Zhui Yuming's supernatural powers, so he could only sit there and not do anything. Hu Xian understood that the Daylight Hall master had always been inherited by the aristocratic families, so he had to take care of the family's interests. Although he tried to break free from the Qin family's restrictions, he had to repay them for teaching him techniques in the past. The two couldn't be completely severed, but from now on, the primary and secondary positions had to be changed. As for the remaining few families, their disciples had to think of ways to take care of them. Perhaps with pill jades, or perhaps with the identity of a disciple. Only then could the power of the aristocratic families be united. There were pros and cons. The advantage was that as long as there were enough benefits, the power of the various families could be united in a short period of time. However, in the long run, there would be many restrictions. In fact, he was a little envious of Zhang Yan. The latter wasn't a disciple of any Taoist grotto heaven, and he had no peers. Although he didn't have much of a foundation, he also didn't have many ties. Especially his two disciples, who were extraordinarily talented and had long entered the third stage. If they entered the grotto heaven realm in the future, they would definitely be able to firmly control the Duzhen Hall and run a strong force. Aside from the sect master, no one else would be able to interfere. After Madame Chen got a satisfactory answer, she knew that Hu Xian was busy refining the talisman, so she didn't dare to disturb him too much. After saying a few private words between husband and wife, she brought the servants back to the cave. After she left, the smile on Hu Xian's face disappeared, and he said, "Just now, who's guarding the door?" The boy beside him said in a trembling voice, "It's Yin Fei and Yin Ming." Hu Xian said in a deep voice, "The Daylight Hall is the upper hall of our Qinsang school. Those who aren't the elders of the hall can't enter without permission. Just now, Jinren Chen entered the hall without permission. It's the fault of the guards. Pass my order, take away the status of the two guards and demote them to guard the little cold world. Within 100 years, their family members can't enter the hall to cultivate Tao." The boy didn't dare to disobey the order. He didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. After a bow, he went down the hall to pass the order. Hu Xian waved his sleeve and ordered everyone in the hall to leave. Soon, he was the only one left in the hall. He held up the 36 Kongyue and looked at it. He called out softly in his heart. After a while, a short and fat old man who looked like a rich man walked out. He bowed with a smile and said, "Jinren Hua, long time no see." Hu Xian also smiled and said, "Indeed, long time no see. Jinren Kongyue, I'm here on orders from the sect to fight against the sky demon. Are you willing to help me?" The old man stroked his beard and said, "Yes, of course I'm willing. It's my duty to kill the demon." Hu Xian heard him and stood up. He bowed to him solemnly. "I'm here to refine the treasure. I'll need your help, Jinren." He had seen many treasures, but this true spirit was the easiest to talk to. Even if there wasn't a grotto heaven in the Qin clan and he couldn't refine the treasure, he didn't complain. After it was refined, it often came out to play with the children and told them some interesting stories. It also liked to wander around and was often the guest of the younger generation of the Qin clan. Even his two disciples were lucky enough to entertain this true spirit a few times. He activated the restriction in the hall and sat on the platform. He placed the treasure on top and focused on refining it. With the help of the treasure and the true spirit, he didn't need to spend much effort. In just 3 days, he had roughly refined it. However, to truly use it as he wished, he still needed to put in a lot more effort. In the following days, he only went between the Golden Pavilion and the Daylight Hall. He looked at the secret books left by the predecessors and didn't ask about anything else. He even rejected Zhu Xin's invitation. On this day, he was trying to figure out a divine power. The boy said from afar, "Master, Jinren Qi of the upper extreme hall is here." Hu Xian quickly put down the jade book in his hand and stood up, "Invite him in." After a while, Qi Yuntian strode into the hall and stood in front of the door. He smiled and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Hua. Have I disturbed you by coming here?" Hu Xian cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Eldest Marshal Brother, you're too polite. I don't usually get a guest like you. Please, come in and have a seat." The two of them sat in the hall. Qi Yuntian saw the jade book in his hand and said, "Junior Marshal Brother, you must have benefited a lot these few days." Hu Xian sighed, "After entering this state, I realized how big the world is and how small the human body is." Qi Yuntian smiled brightly, using one's heart to replace the heaven's heart, using one's strength to replace the heaven's power, this is the aspiration of our generation. This path is difficult and long, let's work hard together. Hu Xian couldn't help but nod. Because he didn't have a master to guide him and he didn't become the main hall master, he couldn't read the previous hall master's book. During this period of time, he only pondered on it. Today, Qi Yuntian came. He had already entered this state, so he took this opportunity to ask for some advice. The two of them discussed the mysteries of the world, and several hours passed by in a flash. Qi Yuntian looked outside the hall and saw that the sky was getting dark. He said, I should go back to the hall to cultivate. Junior martial brother, do you have any difficulties? Hu Xian thought for a while and said, there is one thing. Although I want to subdue the demon, I still don't know where the demon is. Although I have sent disciples to investigate, there is still no result. Senior martial brother, do you have anything to tell me? Qi Yuntian smiled, Junior martial brother, don't worry. The headmaster has already sent a messenger to Huanjin Temple to ask him to use a secret technique to calculate the demon's whereabouts. I believe there will be news soon. Junior martial brother, just focus on your cultivation. Hu Xian nodded, if that's the case, I will wait for news in the hall. Qi Yuntian stood up and said in a serious tone, after I succeed in subduing the demon, the headmaster still has something important to ask of you. I hope Shenrenhuo will not let us down. As he finished, a long river appeared under his feet and gushed out of the hall. He floated in the air. Hu Xian watched him leave and his expression became slightly serious. Qi Yuntian must have returned to tell him this last sentence. For him to say it in such a serious manner, it must be a very important matter. The reason why he didn't say it now was because he hadn't become the main hall master yet. If that's the case, he must not make any mistakes in subduing the demon. Moreover, this was the first time he made a move after becoming a grotto heaven. Once he makes a move, everyone in the world will be watching. He must succeed, he must not fail. However, the sky demon must not be underestimated. To ensure that nothing goes wrong, he decided to find someone of the same generation to practice with. With the 36 mountains in his hands, he did not have to worry about the commotion. After thinking about it, he felt that he could find Zhang Yan. Although he had not been in the grotto heaven for long, his mana was strong and he had fought with several grotto heaven Zenrens. He even killed Yan Changsheng. Moreover, he sent many Dan Jades to him last time. He owed him a big favor. This time, he could use this opportunity to return the favor. Chapter 1013. Dongshan Continent, in front of Stone Brush Mountain, a ray of clear light landed. With a loud bang, it smashed into the rocks and scattered them. Then, the light retracted and Ji Xiangping walked out quickly. He turned around and saw the cave that Hang Yuyan was cultivating in. As he was in a hurry to save her, he didn't care about anything else. He soared into the air and charged in. However, he had only entered 100 feet when his expression changed. He saw a gale surging in front of him, and it was mixed with iron sand and gold shards. With a sound of friction, it blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it surged towards him. When he got closer, he felt his mana being worn away. Such a formation was designed to deal with the people from the heavenly grotto heaven. If he used his dharma and used his magic power, he wouldn't have to worry about it. However, if he barged in like this, his magic power would definitely be depleted. Moreover, he didn't know what was going on inside. If he wasn't careful, he might accidentally hurt Hang Yuyan. He quickly thought about it and retreated. Gan Shouting also arrived at this moment. Seeing him flying out, he asked in shock, Dao brother, what's going on? Ji Xiangping frowned, that's weird. The restriction inside is actually intact. If spiritual master Hang encountered an enemy, why would this happen? Gan Shouting looked in and also noticed that the restriction was moving. He said, no matter what, we'll only know after we enter. When spiritual master Dong Tian encountered such a restriction, he would use treasures to slowly dissolve it so that he wouldn't suffer too much damage. However, saving people was more important now, so the two of them didn't have the time to wait. Gan Shouting said solemnly, Dao brother, wait for me to enter the formation with the golden sword and activate the restriction. Then, you can try to enter and destroy the altar. This way, we can break it. When he finished, he didn't wait for the other party to reply. With a thought, a golden light flew out from between his brows. It entered the tunnel and in an instant, the formation was activated. When Ji Xiangping saw this, he charged in again. At the same time, he released a strong gust of wind and quickly arrived at a 10 feet tall altar. Knowing that it was a formation, he casually smacked it and destroyed it. Then, he went to the other positions. After destroying 5 altars, the formation energy finally calmed down. As they had already spent a lot of time outside, the two of them didn't wait for the formation energy to completely dissipate. They forcefully broke through the formation energy and charged in. In the deepest part of the cave mansion. When he took a closer look, he saw Han Yuyan sitting upright on the meditation cushion. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about her, but her eyes were tightly shut, and the enormous vital energy on her body was constantly declining. Both of their expressions turned serious. At this rate, he would die in at most 2 to 4 hours. He just didn't know why. He could only check it out first. Gan Shouting sensed for a moment before saying solemnly, Yuyan has already severed her mortal heart. It's very likely that it's an external demon that entered his body. It's just that it's not an ordinary heart demon. Otherwise, he would have gotten rid of it long ago and wouldn't have to take this step. Ji Xiangping grinned and said, "This is a little difficult." Gan Shouting pondered for a long time before saying, "I have an idea. I wonder if fellow Taoist Ji is willing." Ji Xiangping was displeased. At a time like this, if you have a solution, just say it. Why hide it? Gan Shouting said, no matter if it's an inner demon or an external demon, it's a battle that involves one's soul and soul. It's not something we can easily interfere with. She can only rely on herself to defend against it. However, we can use our powers to protect her chi meridian and spiritual vigor to help her get through this tribulation. I wonder if you are willing. Ji Xiangping instantly understood. Usually, when a cultivator's soul was damaged, with the protection of the body, they could slowly recover after circulating their spiritual vigor. Gan Shouting's idea was to use their merit to support Han Yuyan and think of a way to exhaust the external demon. This method was feasible, but firstly, the amount of spiritual vigor that Han Yuyan could borrow was actually limited. It was already not bad if she could borrow 1 out of 10. Secondly, the two of them would definitely lose a lot of merit, and they might not be able to recover until the tribulation. He couldn't help but hesitate. Gan Shouting said, since the 3 of us came from Donglai, we've been in the same boat through thick and thin, sharing honor and glory. That's why we were able to conquer Dongxing South State and create such a great situation. That old demon Luomengza was afraid of the 3 of us joining forces, so he didn't make a big move. Without Yuyan, how can we maintain this situation? Moreover, according to the rules set by the founding master, it's the Ku Xian sect's turn to control the precious brush in these 1,000 years, so we can't do without her, or else how can we open up the grotto heaven? When Ji Xiangping heard that, she felt that everything he said was reasonable, so she made a decision. If I don't save Jinren Hang, you'll definitely blame me in the future, so I'll listen to you. I just hope that my merit doesn't suffer too much. Gan Shouting was overjoyed, and said with a straight face, as long as she's alive, the sect can try to recover her merit. Ji Xiangping thought to herself, if I really suffer too much this time, I'll just do as he said and make a trip to Shaotsang realm. He said, you and I will take turns to help her, so let me go first. Having said that, he sat down and pointed his finger, and a spiritual light entered Han Yuyan's forehead. Gan Shouting took out a tiger paperweight from his sleeve and blew on it. It turned into a burly man as he landed on the ground. He instructed, go keep watch outside. If there's any movement, quickly report to me. The burly man bowed and left the cave. After doing this, he walked around the cave again and set up many more restrictions in the cave. Because Han Yuyan couldn't find out the cause of her misfortune, he was afraid that there was an enemy lying in ambush. With these arrangements, if there were any changes, he could be prepared. Although they were of the same generation and could see each other's aura from afar, it wasn't impossible for those with tricks to conceal it. For example, when Shen Baishuang came last time, he didn't notice at all. At this moment, Sima Quan also sensed the arrival of the 2 enlightened masters outside. He thought that he had failed on the verge of success, but he didn't expect that after the two of them discussed for a while, other than using the chi replenishing technique, they didn't do anything else. He was surprised at first, but then he was overjoyed. So these two don't know the exorcism technique. Because the Taoists of the Donghua continent had to fight against the demonic sects, many sects had some methods to guard against demons. Although some were strong, some were weak, but even if the weakest method was used by the enlightened masters, it wouldn't be difficult to salvage the situation today. However, Ji and Gon inherited the orthodoxy of Donglai, and there was no demonic sect in the Dongshan continent, so they naturally didn't need to use such Taoist techniques and supernatural powers. Sima Quan was relieved. Now that he had trapped their spirit, every time he absorbed it, he could use it to strengthen himself. No matter how much spiritual vigor the two of them replenished, it wouldn't be as fast as his erosion. If this continued, he would be the winner sooner or later. However, if he went too far, it was inevitable that the other party would notice the abnormality in advance and come up with other tricks. The best way was to retreat in order to advance. First, he restrained himself and waited for the two of them to replenish his mana. Then, he would slowly wear them down. During this process, it would be fine as long as Hang Yuyan didn't wake up. If there was a chance, he didn't mind taking out their spirits. After working hard for a long time, Ji Xiangping saw that Hang Yuyan's spiritual vigor was no longer weakening. Instead, it was gradually improving. She couldn't help but be happy and said, "This method is useful." Although Gon Shouting was happy, he was still cautious and said, "Don't be careless." Ji Xiangping nodded. After another 10 over days, the spiritual light on Hang Yuyan's face gradually brightened and she stopped weakening. However, he felt that it was hard for his mana to continue. After holding on for a few more days, he shook his head and said, "Jinren Gon, you'll have to do it." Gon Shouting was already prepared. He nodded solemnly and sat down. He rolled up his sleeves and pressed down with his palm. A spiritual light covered Hang Yuyan's head and said, "Thank you for your hard work, brother. You can go and adjust your breath first. I'll do the work next." Ji Xiangping saw that he had taken over and retreated. He took out a few pills and sat down to adjust his breath, hoping to recover his mana as soon as possible. Gon Shouting's cultivation was slightly inferior to Ji Xiangping's. After holding on for 9 days, he felt tired. However, Hang Yuyan's condition was much better now. If there were no accidents, the two of them would take turns to help her wake up. Ji Xiangping took a few glances and said, "Jinren Gon, stop and rest. I'll be fine here." Gon Shouting did not hold on anymore and retreated. During this period of time, Sima Quan looked at the two of them coldly. However, he did not invade them too much and only used the spirit to maintain his own cultivation. However, he noticed that Hang Yuyan was gradually recovering with his help. He felt that if he continued to ignore her, she would leave his grasp. Thus, he did not wait any longer and activated his full power again. When he moved, Ji Xiangping immediately sensed it and shouted, "Not good." Upon seeing this, Gon Shouting's expression also changed. He didn't have time to sit down and adjust his breathing. He took out a small bottle and fiercely inhaled the spiritual energy within it. With a shout, a large coiled phoenix tablet flew out from the top of his head. Its tail feathers emitted a 7-colored stream of light. It gently swept and instantly collected the spiritual energy. Sima Quan secretly sneered and was about to add more fuel to the fire. Who knew that at this moment, the spirit that he wanted to seize with all his might would suddenly come over on its own. He was also caught off guard. It was as if he was about to swallow a mouthful of water, but now he was pouring a full vat into his mouth. At the same time, a glow appeared on Hang Yuyan's face. Her eyelids rippled and she opened her eyes. She said, "Fellow Taoists, there's a powerful devil occupying my body. He was the one who tricked you into wasting your magic power. This devil is powerful. I'll feed him with my spirit and it should be able to delay him for a while. Please leave quickly. I'll leave the Ku Xan sect to you too." As she spoke, 2 golden rays shot out from her eyes and turned into 2 talismans that flew to the 2 of them. Gan shouting was agitated. He took a step forward and said, Yuyan, you, however, Ji Xiangping grabbed him. His expression was solemn as he shook his head and said, Perfected Master Gan, Perfected Master Hang has already passed away. We still don't know what that devil is. We don't have any strength left. In order to not waste her efforts, we should leave quickly. Gan shouting could naturally tell that Hang Yuyan's life was at its end. Just now, her words were merely her last words left with her magic power to warn them. Although he was unwilling, he had no other choice. With a heavy sigh, he took the talisman and stomped his feet heavily, retreating with Perfected Master Ji. Not long after the 2 of them left, Hang Yuyan's body trembled. Fine cracks appeared on her face and neck. Then, her entire body shattered like glass, turning into shattered crystals all over the ground. When they collided, there was the sound of pearls and jade colliding. Then, a gust of cold wind flew out and spun a few times on the spot before leaving the cave abode. Chapter 1014. At the end of the hour, above the floating heavenly palace, a ball of golden fiery light soared like the sun in the sky. It passed through many palaces and slowly landed in front of the outer hall of the Duzhen Hall. The rays of light retreated to the sides and suddenly disappeared. Hu Xian walked out from inside and said to a Daoist on duty in front of the hall, I had an appointment with Jinren Zhang some time ago, I wonder if he is here now. The Daoist on duty hurriedly bowed and said, so it's Jinren Hua of the Divine Hall. We don't know the whereabouts of the hall master, so we will report it now. Please wait for a moment, Jinren. The person who came was not an ordinary person, so he did not dare to delay. He immediately used a flying talisman and sent it deep into the hall. At that moment, on the stone seats outside the hall, many elders who were cultivating here stood up and bowed. Although Hu Xian was not the main hall master of the Divine Hall, he had already achieved the Grotto Heaven. To others, it was only a matter of time before he inherited the position. To treat such a person, it would not be too much to be respectful. Yu Chongyang was also standing among the crowd. He looked at Hu Xian and was extremely envious. He thought to himself, the people of the Grotto Heaven are different after all. They are already at the peak of this world and are far from what we mortals can compare to. I wonder if I have the hope to achieve this in this life. He was different from the people here. The teacher who had guided him into the Tao was only a mystic light realm cultivator, and he had died a long time ago. He didn't have a high-class sect, but he was lucky back then and obtained a godly item. That was why he was able to cultivate to such a stage by himself. However, if he wanted to go further, it was almost impossible without the help of the sect, the guidance of a master, and the spiritual breathing. After all, not everyone was as talented as Shinchong. Originally, he had already given up on this idea. However, this time, when Zhang Yan allowed him to cultivate at the Duzhen Hall, he saw a glimmer of hope. As long as he had enough spiritual opportunity and could gather all the external medicine, this step was not impossible. Hu Xian waited outside for about 20 breaths of time before a beam of light came over. The disciple on duty took a look and bowed, saying respectfully, Spiritual Master Hua, the hall master invites you. Hu Xian stepped forward. When he arrived in front of the hall, the 2 large doors suddenly turned into water vapor and dispersed like smoke, opening up a path. He then walked further in and arrived in front of the border pass. He raised his head and saw Zhang Yan standing there with a smile on his face. Unconsciously he stood still, raised his hand to salute and said, How dare I trouble Duzhen Hall Master to come out and welcome me. Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said with a smile, Senior Marshal Brother Hua, we are not on the platform, so you can just call me by my usual name. Please come into the realm for a chat. Hu Xian responded with a smile and followed him into the small world. It was also his first time coming here. Seeing the boundless torrential waves, the distant sky and the distant sea, and the leisurely white clouds, he couldn't help but feel relaxed. At this moment, 2 black shadows flew over from the opposite side. Upon closer look, it was 2 Taoist priests waving their whips, each of them driving 4 inky flood dragons to pull the 2 carriages. Not long after, the carriages steadily landed under the feet of the two of them. Zhang Yan turned his body and gestured for them to enter. After Huxian thanked him, he boarded one of the carriages. Zhang Yan then boarded the carriage. After he stood still, the Taoist priest in front swung his whip and the flood dragon flew up in pain, flying into the sky. Huxian rode the carriage in the sky, talking to Zhang Yan while looking at the scenery around him. He thought, this place is similar to the Origin Ocean realm in my Daylight Hall, but there are also some differences. When he first entered the Origin Ocean realm, he also saw boundless waves. However, when he went deeper in, he saw islands of all sizes, plains, and hills. There were more mountains than here. Zhang Yan seemed to know what he was thinking and pointed below. When I came to this world, I thought that the mountains and rivers were naturally like this. After entering the main hall and looking through the books, I found out that all hall masters can use their own power to change the scenery and spirit veins of the world to make it easier for them to cultivate. Because the previous two hall masters cultivated in the upper cave of the Xuanzi, this place is a stretch of river waves. Even the name of this small world was crowned at that time. If the later generations do not like it, they can change the name at any time. Huxian didn't know about this. He nodded and said, so there's such a reason, I've learned. The Origin Ocean was mostly land and water, and he cultivated the element of metal and fire. When he first entered, he felt quite uncomfortable. Now that he thought about it, it was because the previous hall master cultivated the element of water and earth. He secretly made up his mind that after he became the main hall master, he would draw out the earth fire and smelt the gold mountain. The two dragon carriages flew for a long time, and suddenly, a layer of mist broke through. A magnificent palace appeared in front of them, with jade pillars and silver walls. Below them, there was a 10,000-mile-long staircase that looked like the body of a dragon, connecting the top and bottom. The cloud dragons flew around in the surroundings, and their roars never stopped. After another 15 minutes, they arrived in front of the main hall. The two Mengs waved the long whips in their hands, and there were two snapping sounds. The 8 dragons shook and lowered their bodies, bringing the carriages down with them. Soon, they stopped in front of the staircase. The two of them chatted and laughed as they entered the main hall and sat down. After a while, several Jing Mengs came up and served fragrant tea, as well as pots of plump red fruits. Each fruit was the size of a fist, and most of them were green branches that hadn't been plucked yet. They were still dripping with dew, and they were piled high, as if they would roll down with a light touch. Huxian took a sip of tea and looked at the busy Jing Mengs around him. He smiled and said, these Jing Mengs may be small in size, but they are meticulous in their work. I wonder if Shidi can give me some to bring back. Zhang Yan smiled and said, of course. He turned back to Jingyu and said, later, choose one and send it to Daylight Hall. Jingyu hurriedly agreed. Huxian smiled and said, in that case, I will thank you here. In my world, although there are people to order around, they are only people with 3 bodies. Although they work hard, they usually travel with bare arms, and look at the wilderness. How can there be such small people who look so comfortable? Zhang Yan had never been to Daylight Hall before, and when he heard this, his interest was piqued. He asked, looks like there are many differences between our 2 halls. I wonder, what does Shidi usually travel on? Huxian said, unlike Shidi's awe-inspiring dragon, there are only 10 or so, Chen Huang. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I heard that riding on this thing can increase one's lifespan by 1,000 years, is that true? Huxian shook his head and said, it is of little value. Lower generation disciples do not have the ability to tame this beast. As for you and me, we are already useless. If Shidi is happy, I can order someone to give you a few. The two of them talked for a while more. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and changed the direction of the palace. He invited Huxian to the sky to watch the cloud dragons dance. When they reached a very high place, a strong man came up to beat the drum. After the rumbling sounds, cloud dragons gathered from all directions. In a short while, there were more than 10 of them. These dragons were not real dragons, but natural spirits of this world. They lived and died with this small world. In the dense mist, they would sometimes change into a dragon's body, spiraling gracefully. Sometimes, they would change into a woman, moving lightly. Around them, there were jingmengs playing music. Among the music, there were flowers blooming in the 4 seasons. When the wind blew, the flowers scattered all over the sky. 2 hours later, the cloud dragons turned into mist and dispersed, leaving only a lingering fragrance. Huoxian couldn't help but clap his hands in praise. After a few more words, he found a chance to take something and put it on the table. He cupped his hands and thanks to Shidi Zhang's care, I have a few elixir jades to cultivate. I heard that after Shidi Zhang's battle with Yan Changsheng, you are cultivating and recuperating. This time, I brought some to repay you. Because of the battle with the Sky Demon, he borrowed these elixir jades from the Qin clan. After he obtained the position of the main hall master, he would naturally return them with double the amount. Zhang Yan smiled and ordered Jingyu to come up and collect it. Huoxian saw that he kept it well. After a few more words, he said the real reason for his visit, Shidi Zhang should know that when there is news from an Ata temple, I will be going out to suppress the demons. It is just that ever since I achieved this body, I have never fought with an enemy. I am afraid that if I go into battle hastily, I will embarrass Qinsong. Thinking that Shidi Zhang has fought with people a few times and was never at a disadvantage, I specially came to ask for guidance. Zhang Yan responded with an, oh, and his interest was immediately piqued. Although he pretended to be calm to the outside world, in reality, he had recovered a long time ago. He had the intention to improve his fighting ability when the disaster came. To be able to fight with someone of the same generation was exactly what he wanted. He smiled and said, since Shidihua has the intention, then let's study and learn from each other. If we really fight, not only will it hurt our harmony, it will also hurt our cultivation. How about this, you and I each send out an avatar to fight? Huoxian agreed and said, that would be great. I am here as a guest, so I cannot ruin the master's land. Coincidentally, I have brought along the 36 mountains. This treasure can protect the mountains and rivers, so I can be at ease and ask for guidance. Zhang Yan had long heard about this treasure, so he wanted to see it. He smiled and said, later on, I want to see the power of this treasure. Shidi Zhang, feel free to use it. After the two of them came to an agreement, they sat cross-legged and did not move. However, a wisp of smoke flew up from the top. When it reached a high place, each of them transformed into an avatar, and the two of them bowed to each other and retreated. When Huoxian's avatar was far away, he tossed the 36 mountains into the sky. The treasure instantly transformed into a huge rock that was 10,000 feet in size. It stopped in midair, and then countless flying cliffs flew out from it, densely covering the sky. Zhang Yan's avatar watched for a while, then suddenly raised his hand and pointed, and a talisman flew out. However, when it approached a cliff, it was clearly just a little bit away from colliding with it, but after flying for a long time, it still could not reach the cliff. He immediately knew that this treasure definitely had a magical effect, like so close, yet worlds apart. After Huoxian's avatar tossed out the treasure, it retreated and turned around. It actually went behind a mountain rock and disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan's avatar did not mind and stood still in midair. However, a cloud of dark mist rose from his body and spread out, covering himself, making it impossible to see where he was. At this moment, Huoxian's avatar used the Kong mountain to move and had already turned to the other side. He looked at the cloud of mist and said, Jinren Kong mountain, what do you think we should do? As soon as he finished speaking, a short and fat old man leaped out. He stared in front of him and stroked his beard as he said, this Duzhen Hall master is not simple. His strength is so strong that even old master was far inferior to him when he was in this realm. This is a rare opportunity to test his strength. Jinren, why don't you fight him head on first? You can also know how big the difference in strength is. Later on, you can also come up with a countermeasure. The 36 mountains were once refined by 3 Qin clan's Dongtian people, and one of them even infused his own knowledge into his true consciousness. Now that the true spirit was born, the younger generation holding this treasure was equivalent to having a teacher that they could ask for guidance at any time. Hua Xian's avatar pondered for a moment and nodded. All right, I've always heard that junior brother Zhang's strength is tyrannical. This is a rare opportunity, I can also give it a try. He spread out his avatar, and it was like a golden sun that emitted a dazzling brilliance. 2 rays of red and gold light took over the color of heaven and earth. With a rumbling sound, they collided with the cloud of dark mist. Chapter 10:15. The domain name of this site was synchronized with your mobile phone. In an instant, the 2 Dharma images collided in the sky. Under the convergence of this magic power, the waves of water and the clouds were all shaken and disappeared, leaving only a white land. It was as if there was no room for maneuver in this violent collision. There was no trick to it. The golden sun Dharma idol suddenly collapsed into countless golden sparks and light flowers, and retreated backward. Although Zhang Yan's avatar won, he didn't take advantage of the situation to pursue. With his current fighting ability, if he was defeated in a real battle, he only needed to press forward and the defeated would have no chance of turning the tables. However, this time, the purpose of the battle was to learn from each other, not to determine victory or defeat. Naturally, there was no need for him to pursue and he could allow the opponent to return and use his methods. The golden sparks and clouds retreated for more than 1,000 miles before stopping and gathering again. In a flash, Hua Xian's avatar appeared again. There was a hint of surprise and also a hint of emotion on his face. With a flash of spiritual light, Kongyue True Spirit suddenly leaped out and said in surprise, Master, this Hall Master Zhang's magic power is stronger than I expected. You can't fight him head-on, or you won't be able to last until the end. It's better to borrow my power to move around and find an opportunity. Hua Xian deeply agreed. Even though the 36 Peaks wasn't a true treasure of slaughter, it had boundless miraculous uses, and to a certain extent, it was even superior. In this world created by this magic treasure, he only had to slightly summon it before he could casually move to any corner of this world. Because of this, not only would he be in an invincible position, he could also change more methods to attack the enemy. As he spoke, he suddenly saw the mysterious qi in front of him converge and merge into a ball, as if it had merged with heaven and earth. Kongyue True Spirit stroked his beard and said, Look, Master. This is the power of a circle, gathering magic power. It is full both inside and outside, and it can defend against enemies from all directions. It is the most tenacious. Hua Xian carefully looked at it and felt that there were no flaws. He thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, Even if it is easy to defend, it won't be able to last long if others attack at will. The Guiyu True Spirit said, Reverend's words hit the nail on the head. This Hall Master Du Zhen is obviously willing to accompany you to the end. This is an opportunity that is hard to come by. You don't have to be courteous. It's just a doppelganger here. Even if it's destroyed, this isn't a dangerous place. I can easily clean it up without too much damage. With the abundance of spiritual vigor in the Daylight Hall, I can recuperate it back in about a month. Hua Xian pondered for a while. He agreed, All right, I'll give it a try. He understood that although it was difficult to attack the circular defense, there were no openings in all 4 directions. However, this also meant that the magical power was scattered. As long as he focused his power on one spot, he would be able to tear it apart. As a result, he raised his hand and beckoned. In a split second, a great fire flew down from the sky, soaring high into the sky. It was majestic and magnificent, with a golden halo surrounding it. He waited until his momentum was full before pointing forward. Like a sharp awl, it shot out and pierced the profound qi. However, before they could reach him, an enormous hand suddenly stretched out from the clouds and blocked their path. Seeing that the attack was about to be blocked, the Guiyu True Spirit's eyes flashed and he immediately used a technique to shift. The dazzling golden flame suddenly disappeared, and when it appeared again, it had already avoided the large hand, circled above the profound qi, and then pressed down with a bang. Just as they were about to collide, hundreds of sharp sword lights flew out from within, slashing horizontally and vertically. They flew back and forth, forcefully slicing the golden flame into countless scattered spiritual energy. That was not the end. The profound chi turned, and there was a series of rumbling sounds. Thunder clouds exploded, and lightning snakes danced in the clouds. Huoxian's clone let out a clear whistle, but it shook the 9 heavens. In an instant, there seemed to be an invisible force spreading in all directions, and the thunder clouds dispersed. Then, he stretched out his hand and pressed forward, suppressing all the lightning and instantly dispersing it into nothingness. After getting rid of the threat, he waved his sleeve again, and tens of thousands of bright flames flew out. The moment they came into contact with the chaotic profound chi, they immediately ignited and burned but were not extinguished. The profound chi was retracted, and Zhang Yan's clone turned around. He looked down, and the fire on his body retreated with his gaze. It was only forced into his sleeve, but there was still a trace of it that could not be extinguished. He smiled faintly and shook his sleeve slightly. Suddenly, a flash of water appeared and swept her into his sleeve. No one knew where she went. Huoxian's clone saw that he dealt with it so calmly and praised him. He was about to attack again, but suddenly, the sky above him darkened. He looked up and saw that the mysterious yellow hand had turned back. Thus, he used the help of his treasure to turn to another direction. However, just now, he suddenly saw that the sky was filled with ink-like droplets. There seemed to be tens of thousands of them, and between them, there seemed to be lightning flashing. They seemed to connect together and almost covered the entire sky. He heard the Kongyue true spirit's anxious voice saying, "Jinren, please retreat. This is Xianming heavy water." Huoxian listened to his advice and moved again. This time, when he came out, he saw that the sky was filled with sword lights. Just now, he had already seen the sharpness of the sword lights, and a lot of it had been cut down. He did not want to face it head-on, so he could only hide again. However, he changed positions 3 times in a row, and every time he appeared, he was forced to the door by Zhang Yan's divine arts. He could not find a suitable opportunity to attack. The Kongyue true spirit reminded him, "Jinren, why don't you retreat far away first and then come up with a plan to win?" Huoxian thought for a while and said in a deep voice, "I can't retreat anymore. Although it is not a battle of life and death, and junior brother Zhang will not chase after me after winning, I can't rely on this." He raised his head and stared ahead. "If I want to change the situation in front of me, I can only face it head-on." As soon as he finished speaking, he opened up his Dharma form and turned it into a dazzling golden sun. With a rumble, it collided with the heavy water that was attacking him. Then, he attracted the 2 lights of gold and fire, which were like 2 wings flapping, to repel the sword lights. Once he had resolved the attack in front of him, he made a hand sign and gently blew out a breath of air. It was as if the ground fire was spewing out, and instantly, countless molten gold rolled forward. Although the 2 clones were fighting fiercely in the treasures, their real bodies were playing chess in the main hall. Sometimes, they were sipping tea, and sometimes, they were chatting. Their expressions were calm, as if neither of them cared about the situation above. Zhang Yan took a piece and put it down. He smiled and said, "Senior brother Hua, I wonder what method you will use to subdue the demon." Huoxian sat up straight and said slowly, "Recently, I have read many ancient books and secret records. According to the records, the heavenly demon is most afraid of the thunder technique, and also afraid of the pure chi of heaven and earth. After I find his whereabouts, I will use the method of surprise attack to first suppress him with the righteous chi, and then use the thunder technique to eliminate the demon. I must subdue him within a few breaths." After receiving the order to eliminate the demon, he had thought deeply about how to deal with this demon. The heavenly demon could transform into an invisible form. If he could not kill it in a short period of time, then it was very likely that it would escape. Therefore, he thought that if he could not kill it in one strike, it was very likely that he would fail. Therefore, he came up with this plan. Zhang Yan said, "Then senior brother, you must be careful. Previously, the demon recorded in the ancient books, although it is changeable, but this demon is different. It was Elder Sima Quan of the Netherworld Spring sect who used the incarnation-reincarnation technique to occupy its body. I heard that this person has a good character, and likes to use unconventional methods. He cannot be treated as an ordinary demon. Look at this, the heavenly demon is a great enemy of our generation of cultivators, but he is able to lie dormant and hide in the cracks between the two sections. This shows how cunning this demon is. Hu Xian looked at the chessboard and pondered for a while before putting down a chess piece. He nodded and said, I heard that Sima Quan had previously fought with the disciples of Ping Du, Huanjin, Li Shan and other sects in the southwest. I have already ordered the disciples to search for this person's past and see if they can find any weaknesses in his character. Because we are afraid that this demon will find out, we dare not make a big fuss. However, if we wait for another month or so, we will have some results. Although he had already decided to use Huanjin Temple to calculate Sima Quan's whereabouts, no one knew where he was hiding. There was no guarantee that one of these sects had disciples who had been infected by the demon's poison. To prevent Sima Quan from noticing anything, he ordered the disciples to be as careful as possible. However, this method of gathering information was naturally much slower. Zhang Yan looked at the chessboard and put down another chess piece. He said, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Against an opponent like the heavenly demon, no matter how careful you are, it is not enough. Senior brother's move is also reasonable. However, in my opinion, this is only so. This time, the chances of winning are 50-50, and it is not very stable. Hu Xian's expression changed. He said, I wonder if junior brother Zhang has any good ideas to teach me. Zhang Yan smiled and pointed upwards. He said, Senior brother, you have the magical weapon 36 mountains in your hands. This treasure can form a world of its own, why don't you do something on it? Hu Xian was a little puzzled. Although the 36 mountains was magical, it may not be able to trap the heavenly demon. Once it becomes invisible, it is useless unless it is a treasure to subdue demons. This time, he only took it because he wanted to prevent the continent from collapsing during the battle with the heavenly demon. He did not think of using it to subdue the demon. Zhang Yan said, because of some reason, I have been in contact with a few Taoist friends from Huanjin Temple. I have specially asked them how to subdue a shapeless demon like the heavenly demon that is not afraid of ordinary magical weapons. Hu Xian was just now picking up a chess piece. He paused when he heard this and asked, I wonder how to defeat it. Zhang Yan smiled, I believe senior brother knows that there is a pool of 10,000 refinements thunder in Huanjin Temple. Back then, Jinren Ru Huang's remnant soul was refined there. The people in the temple can use a secret technique to refine an Anata Thunder Talisman. With this talisman on a magical weapon, it can subdue the demon for a short period of time. Hu Xian was surprised and said, there is such a wonderful method. If the 36 mountains could subdue the demon, it meant that he did not need to use only one method. He could trap the heavenly demon and then slowly deal with it. His chances of winning would be greatly increased. However, after thinking about it again, he reacted and asked, the pool of 10,000 refinements thunder talisman was passed down by the founding master. I believe the price to refine the thunder talisman is not small. Zhang Yan smiled, the disaster is coming. To us, what else is better than the spiritual vigor elixir jade? Hu Xian instantly had an idea and said, if that is the case, I am willing to use the elixir jade to exchange for the thunder talisman. Can I ask junior brother to speak on my behalf? Zhang Yan smiled and ordered Jingyu to bring a pen and paper. He immediately wrote a letter and summoned the two ink-black serpents to send it to the gate of Huanjin Temple. At this moment, the movement in the sky gradually calmed down. Both of them felt that the mana that was used to build the split body had been exhausted and dispersed. After a short while, two spiritual lights shot down and entered the top of both of their heads. Hu Xian closed his eyes for a moment as if he was recalling the battle. After a long time, he stood up and bowed solemnly, I have to thank junior brother Zhang for helping me this time. I have benefited a lot from this trip. Zhang Yan also stood up and helped him up. He said in a serious manner, "Senior brother Hua, you don't have to be so courteous. The disaster is coming. As we are from the same sect, we should help each other." Chapter 10:16. After returning from the Hall of Duzhen, Hua Xian went back to the Hall of Daylight to meditate and digest what he had gained from the battle. 3 days later, a brocade box was sent from the Hall of Duzhen. After he opened it, he saw a thunder talisman in it. There was also a letter from Zhang Yan stating that this item was made by Jinren Pang from the Huanjin Temple at the Pool of Thunder. During a battle, he only needed to use it on a magical weapon and he would be able to subdue the demon within 2 to 4 hours. Hua Xian thought about what Zhang Yan had said earlier and could guess that Jinren Pang must have paid a heavy price this time. He told the disciple next to him, "Take the Dan jade that I prepared and send it to the Hall of Duzhen." The disciple bowed and immediately went to make arrangements. After getting the thunder talisman, Hua Xian felt that he had a higher chance of subduing the demon. He calmed his mind and focused on regulating his breathing so that he could recover the lost kung fu before he really started. After another 10 days or so, a jade talisman flew out from the upper extreme hall and stopped in front of the Daylight Hall. It floated there and did not move. It only let out 3 feet of golden light that shone on everything in front of the hall. Hua Xian sensed it in the hall and waved his hand to bring it in. He placed it on his palm and saw a line of small words on it. It said, "There is a filthy light in the Dongxing continent. The sky is filled with filthy poison and it almost covered the sun and moon. It is suspected that the demon is there." After he looked at it, the words disappeared and only the shiny jade talisman was left. Sensing the spiritual vigor in the jade, he knew that the task of subduing the demon would depend on this item. He carefully kept it in his bag. He thought, so this demon went to the Dongxing continent. If I didn't calculate it, it would be hard to find him. But it makes it easier for me to do things. The sky demon was not in the Donghua continent. He had less to worry about, which was a good thing. From the few words in the letter, the demon's kung fu seemed to have improved. Since there was no one in the Dongxing continent who could help him, he had to be extra careful when dealing with him. It was a small matter if he made a mistake, but the sect's reputation was the most important. He looked down at the dozen or so jade scrolls on the table. These were the records of Sima Quan's actions that were sent over by the sect's disciples. He had been cultivating diligently for the past few days and hadn't had the time to look at it, but now he took a few glances. He wrote them all down. However, he noticed something amidst all of this. Although Sima Quan liked to come up with strange and unscrupulous schemes, it could be seen from what he had done in the past. As long as he had his eyes on something, he would use any means possible to obtain it. In order to achieve his goal, he would often take a risk, and there were a few times where he almost lost his life. From this, he came to a conclusion: although this person has become a devil, his behavior hasn't changed much since then. It can be seen that his temperament is still the same. We can make good use of this. In the next 3 days, he settled all the matters in the hall in an orderly manner. He also understood the current situation in Dongxing continent. Only then did he set off on his journey. He rode the wind and flew towards Dongsheng. This time, in order to avoid alerting the sky demon, he tried to hide his qi dynamic. It did not alarm anyone. A month later, they had already crossed the ocean. Outside the East Victory continent. He stood on the ocean and raised his head to look at the continent. He saw a thick dragon python qi in the north, which should be where Luo Zi's was. Since it wasn't his destination, he didn't look too much. He turned his gaze to the south and saw 2 spiritual qi rushing into the sky. It should be the Grotto Heaven cultivators. However, he was slightly suspicious. Originally, he found out that there were 3 Grotto Heaven cultivators guarding Dongxing South Continent, but now he only saw 2 qi dynamic. However, he didn't see a third person. He thought to himself, could it be that the other person has reincarnated? As for whether or not the other person had hidden his qi dynamic, the possibility of that was very small. Firstly, not everyone could do such a thing. He only knew how to do it after he went to the Golden Pavilion to read the books. Secondly, the other party was in his own territory and should be used to intimidate enemies. There was no need for him to be so secretive. He couldn't help but have a thought in his mind. Could this be because of the sky demon? Thinking to this point, he reached into his sleeve and took out the jade talisman. He threw it into the sky and the jade turned to the southeast. The front of the jade gradually turned as black as ink. A wisp of golden flames leaped up in Huoxian's eyes as he looked in that direction. After a long time, he felt that there seemed to be a gloomy, strange, and vexing aura hidden somewhere in the southern continent, and he was immediately able to confirm that the demon resided there. He waved his hand and put the jade talisman down. He thought to himself, there are 2 grotto heaven cultivators in Dongxing South Continent. If I go there rashly, it might cause a dispute. It seems like I need to inform them first. The Deep Abyss sect here is my Qinsang sect. I can ask them to come forward and do this. It wasn't that he was afraid of them, but this trip was to subdue the demon. This was his first priority. He didn't want to cause trouble, so he turned to the north and headed towards the Deep Abyss sect. On the observatory of the Deep Abyss sect, Fu Baoxing was studying when he suddenly felt a flash of light in the sky. He then saw a talisman flying over and landing in front of the steps of the temple. He recognized that it was the central token of Qinsang School. His heart trembled and he took it. After looking at it, he said to the boy beside him, I suddenly gained something recently. I need to cultivate in seclusion. You guys go and take care of the disciples. You don't have to come here for the next few days. Also, inform the others that they are not to step onto the altar without my permission. The boy didn't dare disobey, and he hurriedly withdrew himself. In next to no time, all the attendants beneath the altar had left as well. Fu Baoxing took out the sect leader Jade's seal from his sleeve and gently rubbed it with his palm. Immediately, the restriction of the mountain gate was opened. Just at this moment, a bright scarlet light descended from the sky and landed on the star platform. Then, the light scattered to reveal a cultivator with a thin face and a pair of bright eyes. Gold and fire chi swirled around his body. The heat was intense and the sound of metal clanking could be heard. As he took a step, the altar under his feet trembled as if it was about to collapse. He seemed to have sensed that something was wrong and immediately restrained the chi dynamic on his body. Only then did the surroundings calm down. Fu Baoxing's heart was slightly relieved. He came forward and bowed, saying, Deep Abyss Sect's leader, Fu Baoxing, welcomes High Sect's spiritual master Hua. Huoxian looked at him and smiled, Martial nephew Fu, I have a friendship with your master, spiritual master Zhang. There's no need to be so formal. Fu Baoxing said, this place is simple and crude. It's not a place to entertain guests. Why don't spiritual master follow martial nephew back to the residence? It'll be easier to entertain you. Huoxian shook his head, there's no need. I'm here on the orders of the sect to come to Dongxing continent to exterminate the heavenly demon. This matter can't be delayed. I'll leave after I tell you something. Fu Baoxing was shocked. He thought to himself, is this demon in Dongxing? However, he looked calm and said, please give me your instructions, High Sect's spiritual master. Huoxian saw that his expression did not change when he heard that the heavenly demon was here. Instead, there was a look of admiration in his eyes. He said, I heard that there are 3 grotto heaven cultivators in the south continent of Dongxing. This time, I'm going to exterminate the demon. I need you to pass a message to them to prevent any misunderstandings. Fu Baoxing said, this is not difficult. Martial nephew, write a letter immediately and pass it to the leaders of the 3 sections. They can then pass it to the 3 spiritual masters. Huoxian suddenly asked, is there always 3 grotto heaven cultivators in the south continent? Fu Baoxing said, that's right. Huoxian nodded and said, the heavenly demon can fight with us. Martial nephew, you have to guard the sect for the next few days. Don't go out. Fu Baoxing said, ever since I heard that the heavenly demon was born, I have closed the sect. This place has been restricted by my teacher. As long as the heavenly demon is not here, it will not be damaged. Hu Xian said, that's good. Fu Baoxing excused himself and went to write a letter. He then sent it to Tianzhong. After half a day, a letter came back. He took it and read it. He said, Spiritual Master Hua, the 3 spiritual masters want to meet with you. They said they have something important to discuss with you. Their tone is very serious. Hu Xian sat on the spot and thought for a while. He thought to himself, they are so eager to meet me. Maybe I'm right. Something has happened. If that's the case, I have to meet them to understand the details. He opened his mouth and said, Martial nephew, write another letter. Tell them to prevent the demon from noticing anything strange. Tell them to come and meet you using light and shadow. Fu Baoxing agreed and went down to do as he was told. However, after 4 hours, Hu Xian suddenly felt something. He looked up at the sky and with a shake of his body, a ray of light flew out. When he reached the top of the sky, he saw 2 rays of light coming from the opposite side. They stopped in front of him. They were 2 bamboo talismans. They spun on the ground and 2 shadows appeared. Their faces were blurry, and one could only make out their figures. When the 2 saw Hu Xian, they bowed and said, Are you spiritual master Hua from Donghua continent? Hu Xian returned the greeting and said, That's me. The one on the left said, I am Ji Xiangping from Qing Xian sect. I heard from spiritual master that a demon has come to Dongshan continent. I wonder what kind of demon it is. Hu Xian saw that the 2 did not know anything about the heavenly demon, so he roughly told them about its origin. After listening, the 2 were shocked. Ji Xiangping said, There is such a fierce demon in the world. Gan Shouting said bitterly, I won't hide it from spiritual master Hua. 100 days ago, when spiritual master Heng of Ku Xian's sect was cultivating, he was attacked by an external demon and lost his life. I think it was this demon. When Hu Xian heard this, he frowned and his expression became serious. He was confident that he could suppress Sima Quan, but his foundation was not strong enough. However, if he swallowed a grotto heaven soul, his cultivation would definitely increase greatly, so he had to be careful. Ji Xiangping bowed and said, This demon is vicious. As cultivators of Dongshan continent, we cannot just sit and watch. If spiritual master Hu needs our help, please let us know. Gan Shouting bowed as well. After Hang Yuyan's death, the 2 were shocked and afraid. However, they only knew that the opponent was an external demon, but they did not know how to deal with it. Now that someone had come to surrender, they were more than willing. If Hu Xian failed, they would not have it easy either, so they were willing to help from the side. Hu Xian looked at the 2 and said, That's fine. Fellow Taoists, why don't we make a good plan? At this moment, in an underground cave at the southwest downstream of Dongshan continent's 5 Dragons River, Sima Quan sat inside. After swallowing Hang Yuyan's soul, not only did his cultivation improve greatly, but he also gained a few more supernatural powers. With just a thought, he could even sense all the clones he had left in Donghua continent. It was as if he could teleport back and forth between them with just a thought. However, they were separated by oceans. Even if he could teleport, it would not be without a price, so he did not plan to do so. The only flaw was that the demonic nature had also grown stronger, so it would be difficult to get rid of it. He took out a ball of Yin fire and thought, the cultivators of Dongshan continent are so weak, and they don't know how to subdue demons. It's convenient for me to make a move. After I forge this treasure, I'll go look for them. Chapter 10:17. In the sky above Tsangzhu Peak, 3 figures sat cross-legged opposite each other, discussing how to get rid of the demon. Hu Xian said, I think the heavenly demon is taking advantage of the fact that you don't know anything about him. Since he killed perfected Hang, I believe he will come looking for you in a few days. Why don't we set up an ambush first, wait for him to come and kill him together? Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting looked at each other. Ji Xiangping asked, Are you confident? Hu Xian said, Don't worry, this demon is most afraid of thunder and fire. With this method, we can fight him. Moreover, I brought a treasure from my sect. As long as the heavenly demon is lured into the trap, we can defeat him. Ji Xiangping thought about it carefully. If they didn't get rid of this demon, they wouldn't have a good life. Thus, he decided, if that's the case, I will be the bait. As an enlightened master, he had the courage to do so. Moreover, Hang Yuyan also resisted for a period of time. As long as there was a way to deal with it, he was willing to take the risk. Gan Shouting cupped his hands and said, Perfected Master Hua, I would like to ask a question. Hua Xian said, Go ahead, fellow Taoist Gan. Gan Shouting said, Perfected Master Hua's method is good, but is it too inflexible? It's hard to say when the demon will come looking for us. If he doesn't come, should we just wait for a day? Hua Xian thought about it and said, This demon is suspicious. Waiting for him to come is the best plan. If that doesn't work, I have a secret method to find the demon's whereabouts. You two can pretend to take revenge and go look for him. You might be able to lure the demon out. Gan Shouting thought about it and asked cautiously, Then let's use half a year as the deadline. If the demon doesn't come, we'll use a backup plan. What do you think, Perfected Master Hua? Hua Xian wasn't optimistic about the backup plan, but after thinking about it, he nodded. He didn't think that Sima Quan would wait too long. When he was in Donghua, he didn't move for a long time because he was afraid of being annihilated by the enlightened masters of Donghua. Under such circumstances, he must be in great danger and wouldn't miss any chance to strengthen himself. After devouring an enlightened master's spirit here, he must have tasted the sweetness. How would he let Gan and Ji go? If he wasn't here right now, he was either looking for an opportunity or plotting something in the dark. After the three of them had come to an agreement, in order to avoid attracting Sima Quan's attention, they dispersed their doppelgangers and sat motionlessly at the door, waiting for the sky demon to come at any time. They waited. 100 days passed. In an underground cave in the south continent of Dongsheng, Sima Quan stared at the Yin fire in his hand. With a thought, it slowly transformed into a white lotus. After adding a strand of Hang Yuyan's soul into it, the refinement of this treasure had become much faster. At this moment, it had finally been refined, and he named it Left Dao Lotus. It was different from ordinary magic treasures. This treasure didn't use any precious materials, only soul essence qi. Therefore, he could carry it with him. When he used it, it could attack the soul of a cultivator. To him, it could be considered a handy weapon. He pressed the treasure against his chest and it suddenly disappeared. With another leap, he transformed into a gust of Yin wind and exited the cave. When he reached a high point, he gazed into the distant sky and saw two streams of spiritual vigor rising from the ground into the sky. They danced in the air. He pondered, I've already killed one of them previously. This time, no matter who I look for first, the other will definitely come to help. I need to be prepared to deal with both of them. After pondering, he chose one of the weaker spiritual vigor and flew towards that direction with a gust of Yin wind. These few days, Hua Xian concealed his spiritual vigor and hid in a hill. However, there were no insects or beasts within a radius of a few miles where he was sitting. The ground had turned into a scorched red color. This was caused by his qi dynamic leaking out when he was circulating his mana. However, if no one came close to take a look, it would be difficult to notice the abnormality here. At this moment, the jade talisman on his lap suddenly trembled and turned towards the west. In just a few breaths, the front half of the jade body was burnt black. Just as the jade talisman was about to be burnt, he stretched out his hand and stopped the spiritual vigor from spreading. He kept it carefully and then looked at the direction where the jade talisman pointed. He saw a prominent spiritual vigor at the end. It was the direction where Fengxiang Sword School's Gan Shouting was. He knew that the sky demon had made a move, so he stood up and wanted to follow. However, he only took one step before he stopped. After thinking for a while, he flicked his sleeves and took out two bamboo talismans. He flicked his fingers and shot out two rays of spiritual light. Two light shadows appeared on the talismans. Ji Xiangping's voice came from one of the light shadows, fellow Taoist, did you call us because you found the traces of the demon? Hu Xian said, yes. This demon has already gone to where fellow Taoist Gon is, he must be plotting against fellow Taoist Gon. Gon shouting cupped his hands and said, thank you for informing me, Jinrenhua. I'll go prepare now and wait for the demon to come. Ji Xiangping also said excitedly, all right, brother Gon, please hold on for a while, we'll catch up soon. Hu Xian interrupted, both of you, I think that Jinren Gon needs to hold on for a while. Ji Xiangping said, what do you mean? Could it be that there are some changes? Hu Xian's voice did not have any fluctuation, he said, the sky demon is the most suspicious. After thinking about it, he might try to test us this time. However, just now is the time for him to make a move. If we were to alarm him before this, he might escape. Ji Xiangping was surprised, doesn't Jinrenhua have a talisman with him? Hu Xian said, the sky demon can turn invisible, I can only roughly know where he is. If he only tests us with his doppelganger and we act hastily, we'll definitely fail. That's why we need to wait for him to go all out before we can deal with him. However, if we do that, Jinren Gon will have to suffer a little more. Ji Xiangping was slightly dissatisfied with his sudden change of heart, but now was not the time to be angry. She held back her temper and asked, what do you say, brother Gon? Gon shouting was silent for a while before saying, Jinrenhua's words make sense. Moreover, I'm already prepared this time, I won't be like Yu Yan, having my soul easily taken away by him. Both of you, if I don't call for help later, there's no need to come and save me. Ji Xiangping was stunned, he sighed, brother Gon, why do you have to do this? He knew that this was like playing with fire, if he was not careful, he would suffer the consequences. Gon shouting was very calm, he said, I've made up my mind. If you were in my shoes, I think you would do the same. Hu Xian did not say anything else, he only bowed to him solemnly. After he stood up, Gon shouting's doppelganger disappeared. The bamboo talisman that he entrusted himself with broke in the middle and fell to the ground with a clatter. Sima Quan flew towards the spiritual opportunity for a few hours, he arrived at a mountain range. The terrain here was strange, it was shaped like feathers, overlapping each other. There was a state of ascension, it was as if a gust of wind would blow it straight up to the clouds. He knew that this must be the mountain gate of Fengxiang Sword School, Hongyu Mountain. However, he could not see the majestic spiritual opportunity here. He looked left and right. He thought, there must be a spiritual treasure or formation in this mountain, causing the spiritual opportunity to be mixed up, like clear and muddy water mixing together, making it hard to differentiate. This mountain gate was huge, there were countless temples and pavilions. If there was no obvious target, just going one round would take a long time. However, he did not have to do that. With a shake of his body, he split into hundreds and thousands of demons, all of which were shapeless, and flew to different places, searching for the location of Gon Shouting's cave. If it was before, to turn these demons into shapeless, it would definitely cost him a lot of spiritual opportunity, he would not dare to do it carelessly. However, it was a piece of cake now. In less than a moment. He sensed something, he smiled weirdly and turned to fly in that direction. All the restrictions and formations along the way seemed to sense something was passing by, they did not respond at all. Not long after, he arrived at a high platform. The layout of this place was strange, there were 6 sharp rocks, supporting the top of each other, and the center was empty. There was a polished big rock, in the middle was a 10 to 30 feet wide pond, the pond water was clear, cold smoke was coming out, and there was a bronze cauldron in it. At this moment, there was a Taoist with a crown on his head and a sword on his back sitting in the north, he looked like he was guarding the cauldron. Sima Quan looked at the Taoist's aura, he knew that he must be Gon Shouting from Fengxiang Sword School's Dongtian. He knew that after what happened last time, he would not be unprepared. For him to set up such a formation, he must have made some arrangements. He wanted to observe carefully, leave a clone outside, and then make a move, so that if there was a dangerous situation, he would have a way out. However, just as he was thinking about this, the demonic nature appeared, urging him to quickly devour this person's soul. Sima Quan scoffed coldly. He wanted to suppress it, but not only did this not happen, it even caused the demonic nature to explode, as if it wanted to snatch this demonic body from him. He was not willing. He doubled his strength to suppress it, but as the two fought, the spiritual vigor in his body was reduced by 10%. He couldn't help but be shocked, because if this continued, then he would probably be exhausted to death before the outcome of the battle could be decided. In his helplessness, he could only comply with Gan Shouting's wishes and stop being in a stalemate, and then he charged directly towards Gan Shouting. As expected, with this, the demonic nature immediately disappeared, like a receding tide, and sank back into the depths, unmoving. Gan Shouting suddenly felt a gust of cold wind enter his body and knew that the devil had arrived. He shouted angrily, and the sword on his back flew up and turned into a ray of spiritual light in the sky. In a flash, it came down from the top of his head. After a while, his body emitted waves of thunderous sounds and bright lights flashed everywhere. The 6 huge rocks immediately flew down a few golden chains, and fused with the spiritual light, then a huge amount of spiritual vigor poured into his body. This was him using the spiritual vigor of the entire mountain gate to support and strengthen his spirit. Sima Quan noticed this, but he was not surprised. Instead, he was happy. This method could certainly slow down the situation, but it could not do anything to him. His opponent's actions obviously meant that there was no other way to control him. He immediately laughed, and sneaked into the depths of his spiritual consciousness. At this moment, Huoxian was near Fengxiang Sword School, and because Spiritual Master Ji did not have the qi concealing technique, in order to not be detected by Sima Quan, he did not leave the mountain gate, only leaving his light and shadow form, ready to make a move before rushing over. The two of them waited outside for 3 days. Ji Xiangping saw that Huoxian did not move. She could not help but ask, "Spiritual Master Hua, why are you not making a move?" Huoxian said in a low voice, "Spiritual Master Gan has not called for help. It is obviously not time yet." Ji Xiangping raised her voice, "Perhaps Brother Gan is in danger, and has no strength to call for help. Spiritual Master Hua must not hesitate any longer." Huoxian was unmoved. He said in a low voice, "My friend Gan does not speak much, but I can see that he is calm and intelligent. Since he said this, he must be confident." Ji Xiangping stared at him, but there was nothing she could do. After waiting for another 2 days, suddenly a golden light flew out of the mountain gate. Huoxian saw it, his eyes lit up. He said, "Now is the time." He waved his sleeve, and immediately a spiritual stone flew into the sky, forming a spiritual light screen, covering the entire Hongyu mountain. Chapter 1018. 36 Mountain Peaks. The disciples of Fengxiang Sword Sect had received Gan Shouting's instructions earlier on. During this period of time, no matter what happened outside, they were not allowed to go out. Therefore, even though they could sense the flashes of spiritual light outside, those with profound cultivation all sat in their own cave abodes, concentrating on guarding inside, unmoved. As for the junior disciples, they were also restrained by the restriction outside and could not go out. Ji Xiangping could not hold it in any longer. Seeing that Huoxian was making a move, she raised a strong wind and turned into a ray of light. She escaped from Qing Xian's sect and rushed toward Fengxiang Sword School. In order to prevent the heavenly demon from attacking, the two were not far from each other. In less than 100 breaths, she was already above Hongyu Mountain. She greeted Huoxian and rushed down. At the same time, in Hanyuan sect. Ever since Huoxian left, Fu Baoxing had been using the power of the spell altar to observe the south from the stargazing platform. At this moment, he saw a ball of indistinct fog rising in the sky, and he knew that it must have collided with the heavenly demon. Huoxian was the immortal Dong Tian sent by Qinsang School to deal with the heavenly demon. Logically, there should not be any accidents, but as the head of a sect, he was responsible for the safety of thousands of disciples. He still had to consider the consequences if he failed. After thinking about it, he decided to write a letter to his master and report the situation here. So he called out and ordered someone to bring over a brush and ink. He took out a piece of talisman paper that Yen had bestowed upon him and started writing. He stood up and bowed, and the talisman paper rose into the air and flew in the direction of the Donghua continent. Although Sima Qian was fighting for Gan Xiaoting's soul with all his might, how could the vast spiritual vigor hide from him? He sensed for a moment, then sneered, and did not make any move. Just now, he saw Gan Xiaoting suddenly break off a part of his little finger and send it into the sky. It was not difficult to see that he was calling for help. According to his inference, Ji Xiangping must have rushed over to help and sacrificed some incredible treasure nearby. But even if it was a real treasure, what could it do to his heavenly devil body if he did not have a method to subdue the devil? Therefore, he did not care at all. Not long after, a beam of clear light descended and landed in front of the hexagonal sword cliff. Ji Xiangping appeared from within. Looking ahead, he saw Gan Xiaoting sitting there motionlessly. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and stood there for a moment. When he opened his eyes once more, they were completely cold and indifferent, and there wasn't a trace of emotion mixed within them. He had severed his mortal heart. Then, according to the method that Huxian had taught him, he used his own blood essence as a guide to form several talismans and sent them into Gan Xiaoting's 7 orifices. After the talisman entered his body, it transformed into a young man. This was because Ji Xiangping had used her own blood essence as a bridge to move her soul into Gan Xiaoting's body. In this way, she could fight against the heavenly demon. It was just that he didn't have any experience in divine soul battles. He had even consumed a vitality shielding pill that Huxian had brought over. At this moment, Gan Xiaoting's sea of consciousness was dark and gloomy. Sima Qian's body had transformed into 100,000 feet tall and was controlling a large ball of yin qi, wrapping the smiling smile spiritual light within. It seemed like it wouldn't take long. They could completely extinguish it. Coincidentally, at this moment, a young cultivator leaped over. Without saying a word, he raised his sword and charged at him. He couldn't help but be shocked. He hurriedly retreated. After taking a few glances, he recognized that the person was Qing Xian's Sex Grotto Heaven's Ji Xiangping. At the same time, the weak spiritual light was no longer restrained. It suddenly turned, and Gan Xiaoting came out with his sword, standing coldly at the side. Sima Qian smiled playfully and said, "It seems like the two of you were prepared to deal with me. However, if you stood still and didn't move, I would have to spend a lot of effort. Yet, you chose to use your soul to fight with me. How foolish." Ji Xiangping and Gan Xiaoting remembered what Huxian had said before. A battle between souls was no small matter. Every word and action, every action would damage one's origin. Thus, they didn't say a word and directly shook their bodies. One of them turned into thousands of Xian swords, while the other turned into a bright light. They pressed forward. Sima Qian saw that the two of them didn't fall for it, so he didn't say anything more. He shook his body and turned into a ferocious demon head. With a roar, he charged forward. With a rumble, the sword qi and light were smashed into pieces by the demon head. However, in the next moment, they gathered again and charged forward again. All the external images here were formed by the two's divine wills. As long as their minds were firm and their souls weren't completely exhausted, they could continue fighting. However, Sima Qian was a heavenly demon. This kind of battle was blessed by the heavens. If nothing unexpected happened, the two of them would eventually lose. At this moment, Huxian descended from the sky and landed in front of the two of them. He watched quietly. According to the plan, the two of them would hold Sima Qian back and exhaust him as much as possible. Then, he would use the demon-slaying technique. After Ji Xiangping and Gan Xiaoting fought with Sima Qian for half a day, Gan Xiaoting suddenly reorganized his spiritual light and retreated into the depths of his sea of consciousness. On the other hand, Ji Xiangping returned to her own body. She opened her eyes and said, "Spiritual Master Hua, the opportunity is here. Hurry up and do it." Huxian didn't hesitate. He raised 2 fingers and pointed at the space between Gan Xiaoting's eyebrows. In an instant, the light of golden fire penetrated it. The heavenly demon and even the most filthy yin beings were illuminated by the light of the formation. Sima Qian instantly felt as if he was under the scorching sun. It was extremely unbearable. He couldn't be bothered to stare at Gon shouting anymore. He released a malicious devil chi with all his strength. Huoxian instantly felt all kinds of desires and distracting thoughts surging into his mind. However, his mind was firm. It was as if he was looking at the reflection of the moon in the water. He wasn't moved in the slightest. After a while, the various illusions were shattered one by one. Sima Qian was secretly shocked. The opponent's mana contained the ability to subdue demons. The person who came was obviously not simple. Although he could still hold on for a long time, if this continued, there was a possibility that he would be defeated. With a thought, a face formed from void chi suddenly appeared above Gon Shouting's head. It glanced at Huoxian. It had never seen Huoxian before. It said, "Fellow Taoist, I wonder what happened between us. Why are you making things so difficult for me?" Huoxian didn't say a word. Even his expression didn't change. Sima Qian saw that words were ineffective and knew that there was no way to resolve the matter peacefully. He snorted and covered up the void chi. After a while, a white jade lotus leisurely flew out from within and flew towards Huoxian. Huoxian stood motionless. When the lotus was 3 feet away from him, a ray of light suddenly rose from his robe. At the same time, the exquisite jade seal flew out from his waist and emitted a brilliant ray of light as well. These two items were the protective magic tools of the Daylight Hall's side hall master. When the two lights intersected, it was as if a door was sealed shut. The white lotus was actually unable to invade. It could only spin continuously outside. However, it couldn't find a place to attack. It could only turn around and land on Ji Xiangping. When Huoxian saw this, he waved his sleeve and the 36 peaks above his head spun. In an instant, Ji Xiangping disappeared without a trace. The white lotus paused and spun a few times. It couldn't find Ji Xiangping's whereabouts and couldn't do anything to Huoxian. It could only retreat. When Sima Qian saw that he couldn't hurt his opponent, he couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. There were only two choices at the moment. One was to quickly retreat and wait until he was fully prepared before finding trouble with the two of them. The other was to disregard everything and swallow Gon Shouting's soul. According to his original plan, his opponent obviously came prepared and had a divine art that could restrain his own. He didn't know what other tricks they had up their sleeves, so he couldn't fight them head-on. However, just as he thought about it, the demonic nature actually stirred again. He couldn't help but be shocked. In order to prevent it from coming out, he could only grit his teeth and stay. He turned around and desperately tore apart the remaining strand of Gon Shouting's soul. At this moment, in the outside world, Ji Xiangping came to Huoxian's side and said, "Perfected One, how is it? Are you confident that you can get rid of this demon?" Huoxian said in a low voice, "This demon is now risking his life to attack fellow Taoist Gon. It won't be easy to stop it." Ji Xiangping said, "I'll go and help him." Huoxian shook his head and said, "You can't. Just now, that white lotus is extremely sinister. If it's used again, Jinren Ji might not be able to withstand it." After Ji Xiangping got rid of the knot in his heart, he was no longer as impatient as he usually was. His expression and tone became unusually calm. He thought for a while and said, "My Qing Xian sect has a prayer technique. As long as one has enough mana, one can manifest the wish in one's heart. It's just that my cultivation is low and I can't do it yet. However, I can transfer this demon into my body. This way, fellow Taoist Gon can be safe and I can also resist it for a while." Huoxian couldn't help but be slightly shocked and said, "There's such a technique?" Although he was polite to Ji and Gon on the surface, he actually didn't think much of them. However, it seemed that they did have some tricks up their sleeves. It was no wonder that they could survive in Dongshan continent for so long. If this kind of divine art was used at a crucial moment, it could turn the tide of the battle. Especially at a time like this, it would be even more effective. Ji Xiangping said, This technique was passed down by the founding master, but it's not that easy to execute. If Sage Hu agrees, I will immediately start the ritual. Hu Xian pondered for a while and said, this heavenly demon is more powerful than I thought. Just now, fellow Daoist Ji has already fought a battle and consumed a lot of energy. Even if you transfer it into your body, you might not be able to subdue it in one go. Ji Xiangping didn't get angry because he rejected the suggestion. Instead, he looked over with an extremely calm gaze and said, then what does Sage Hu think? Hu Xian said in a deep voice, since you have this technique, why don't you transfer the demon to me? Ji Xiangping looked at him for a moment and saw his determined expression. He nodded and sat down cross-legged. After a few breaths, a large silver brush flew out from behind him. The tip of the brush shone brightly. Between the strokes, there were tiny marks that brushed past, as if he was sketching a mysterious script. Right at this moment, Sima Quan suddenly felt dizzy. When he woke up again, he realized that he had entered another person's sea of consciousness. He didn't know why, but when he turned around to explore, he was surrounded by a sea of fire, and Hu Xian was sitting in it. He hesitated for a moment, but still rushed forward. Hu Xian ignored the changes in his sea of consciousness and made a hand sign. Suddenly, a ray of spiritual essence rushed into the sky and split open the high clouds. He leaped up and swept up the 36 peaks. In the blink of an eye, he broke through the high clouds and knocked away the 9 layers of clouds. He arrived outside the void. Looking back, he saw the blazing sun in the sky behind him, emitting boundless light. His face revealed a determined expression. The heavenly demon was fond of yin and feared yang, but it was also afraid of thunder and fire. Now that he was outside the void and the sun was near, he could borrow the pure yang fire power to circulate around his body and completely refine it. Even if he was careless, he might get himself killed as well, but he had nothing to fear. He waved his hand, and immediately, millions of rays of light poured into his body. Chapter 1019. Hu Xian directed the great sun pure yang fire into his body, burning it from top to bottom. At the same time, his qi activity shone into his spirit, and a boundless brilliance appeared in his consciousness. Although he cultivated the golden fire mystic technique, if he allowed the burning qi to invade his body without caring about the consequences, it would damage his spirit and ruin his cultivation. However, since he had made a decision, he was determined. Even if that was the case, he wouldn't take a step back. Sima Quan saw Hu Xian rush out of the 9 heavens in one breath and knew that it was bad. However, he was trapped in Hu Xian's consciousness and wanted to get out, but it wasn't something that could be done in a short period of time. Now that he was burned by the qi, he felt like he was in a furnace. The qi in his body was being shaved, and after a while, he couldn't take it anymore. In a battle between spirits, even if there was a slight fluctuation in emotions, the two of them would be able to sense it. Just like at this moment, even though Hu Xian hadn't attained the mortal heart, his unparalleled determination and willpower to die together with Hu Xian had allowed him to clearly sense it. He spent a lot of effort to swallow the spirit of a heavenly abode, and it wasn't easy for him to cultivate to this stage. He wasn't willing to lose it here. Thus, he hurriedly escaped from Hu Xian's consciousness and turned into a chilly wind and flew away. However, he was above the sky and under the blazing sun, there wasn't any qi. The longer he stayed here, the weaker he would be. He didn't dare to waste any more time and rushed out. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible and return to the cave to recuperate. Once the sky demon left his body, Hu Xian immediately sensed it, but he didn't stop him. He made a hand sign and said, "Please help me, Jinren Kongyue." Just as he said that, there was a flash of light, and a short old man appeared. He bowed and said, "Jinren, don't worry, I have talismans to help. This demon can forget about escaping." Sima Quan had not flown for more than 100 miles when he suddenly saw a flying rock flying towards him. He did not take it to heart and wanted to use his formless body to pass through it. However, he did not expect that the moment he came into contact with it. His body shook. With a loud bang, he was actually knocked out of the formless state. He couldn't help but exclaim in shock, demon subduing true treasure. However, with a quick thought, he realized that it wasn't right. However, at this moment, he didn't have the time to think any further because Hu Xian had already caught up to him from behind, and with a wave of his hand, numerous bolts of lightning flames shot out. Zhang Yang's aura enveloped the area. Sima Quan anxiously tried to escape into nothingness again, but the boulder exploded at this moment, turning into countless tiny stones and sand. Under its impact, the Dharma body was forced out again. The boundless lightning and fire just happened to descend. Suffering this attack, he felt as if he had fallen into purgatory, and he immediately howled miserably. He could only flee in panic. However, within the 36 mountain peaks, no matter how much he could transform, no matter where he fled to, Hu Xian would catch up to him in time. Then, he would have to endure a wave of lightning and fire attacks. However, in the next moment, he couldn't hold on any longer, and he wondered if he should move out. In this way, he would have to give up more than half of the fruits that he had swallowed with great difficulty. But no matter what, it couldn't be compared to his own life. As long as he could survive, it was not impossible to make a comeback. But just now, just as he was about to cast the spell, his body trembled and a pained expression appeared on his face. The demonic nature actually came out to cause trouble again, obstructing him in every way possible, not allowing him to do so. No matter how much he tried to suppress it, it was useless. Instead, he wasted a lot of his cultivation. Sima Quan couldn't help but feel extremely annoyed, and he cursed in his heart, if it wasn't for you always coming out to ruin my plans, how would I have ended up in such a state? Knowing that he wouldn't be able to escape, he made an extremely risky and crazy decision. Since you want to stand up for me, then I'll let you. Suddenly, he let go of the suppression and allowed the demonic nature to invade his body. At the same time, he split a small strand of consciousness and sent it into the white lotus. In an instant, it turned invisible, and he escaped far away. After doing this, his last consciousness surged forward and the boundless golden flames swallowed it up. Around an hour later, Hu Xian finally got rid of the last strand of demonic energy in the sky. This battle finally came to an end. However, his eyes were still filled with caution. He looked around as if he was searching for something, but he couldn't find anything. Kongyue True Spirit reminded him, Jinren, the demon has been eliminated. Hu Xian nodded and looked around for the last time. He took a step forward and turned into a rainbow light, returning to the ground from the sky. Not long after, he landed on a barren hill. Just as he landed, two streaks of light came from afar. It was Gan Shouting and Ji Xiangping. They arrived in front of him and looked him up and down. Ji Xiangping asked, Jinren Hua, how is it? Hu Xian said in a deep voice, the sky demon has been eliminated. Even if there are clones outside, they won't be able to do anything for now. Ji Xiangping unconsciously relaxed, but she frowned and said, can we find a way to eliminate the demon's clones? Hu Xian shook his head and said, there's no other way for now. This time, we found the whereabouts of the sky demon with the help of a fellow Taoist. It won't be easy to find the clones one by one. However, the two of you don't have to worry. After this setback, if the demon wants to recover its vitality without us noticing, it will take at least 400 to 500 years. Gan Shouting was still worried and said, I'm not afraid that you'll laugh at me. We've been living in a remote place in Dongsheng for a long time. It's not as prosperous as Donghua, so we're not very knowledgeable. Can you teach us the demon fighting techniques? We'll repay you. Hu Xian thought about it. On the standpoint of dealing with the demon, all the cultivators in the world stood on the same side, so there was no need to reject this suggestion. Some of the demon fighting techniques he knew were seen in the Golden Pavilion of Qinsang School, and some were intentionally leaked by Huanjin Temple. The latter did not have any remarkable Taoist techniques other than dealing with the demon, so he could choose to teach them. So he said, I can do as you wish, but the techniques are not easily taught. What do you have to exchange for it? Gan Shouting probed, how about the elixir jade? Hu Xian asked, as far as I know, there's no spiritual point in Dongxing State, so where would you get the elixir jade? He could tell at a glance that the two of them had cultivated much earlier than him, but in terms of their skills, they were far inferior. Other than the fact that the martial arts they practiced were not considered superior, there was also the fact that they did not have the spiritual vigor of the spiritual point to nourish them, so it was difficult for them to improve. Moreover, they did not even have a spiritual point, so how could they talk about the elixir jade? Gan Shouting said vaguely, "Don't come to the same place again, I only hope that Jinrenhua can wait for a few days." Hu Xian was not in the mood to ask him about the details, so he said, "I'm on a mission this time. Since I'm going to get rid of the demon, I can't delay for too long. I'll wait for the two of you for 30 days. Gan Shouting calculated for a while. He said, 30 days is too short, how about 10 more days? Hu Xian nodded and said, "If the two of you are successful, you can come to the school of Hanyuan to look for me." He cupped his hands, and with a leap, a ray of golden fiery light flew up. He turned to the north. The two of them stood where they were, not moving until the ray of light went far away. Ji Xiangping then turned around and said, "Brother Gan, are you going to deal with that Shaozang Jing?" Gan Shouting said, "That's right, or else where would the elixir jade come from?" Ji Xiangping said, "You originally planned to have 4 people, but with one less, even if you invited Luo Mengzi, he would not be able to set up the formation of 4 heavens, so how would you break the formation in the realm?" Gan Shouting shook his head and said, "The situation this time is different. Swift Swallow is dead, so we have one less route of retreat. Even if it's not for the elixir jade, we must get the Shaozang Jing. At worst, we'll just lose some of our skills and attack by force." However, Ji Xiangping pointed out to him, "I heard that Wei Shuling has some friendship with that Taoist Zhang, if he finds out about it. If he finds out, it will be troublesome." Gan Shouting looked at him and said, "So brother didn't obey before. Are you afraid of this?" "Don't worry, brother. This time, we are not going to exterminate her Shaozang Jing. As long as she's willing to hand over the elixir jade, we can protect her if there's trouble in the future. If she doesn't obey, we'll detain her. We'll try to get another realm master to replace her, then it won't be considered as forceful robbery. Not to mention that it's hard for Jinren Zhang to find out about this, even if he did, would he still trouble us for such a small matter?" Ji Xiangping thought about it again. He said, "We can keep one more elixir jade, just in case. If Jinren Zhang really interferes, we can use it to settle this matter." Gan Shouting said, "Brother is wise, let's do it this way." After Hu Xian returned to the Inner Abyss sect, he waited for a month. The two sent a letter, asking him to meet them at the 5 Dragons River. He flew out and arrived at the boundary in half a day. Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting were already waiting there. After greeting each other, Ji Xiangping threw a jade pot over and said, "Does Jinrenhua think that these elixir jade are enough to exchange for that demon-subduing technique?" Hu Xian took it and looked at it. With a flick of his sleeve, 2 jade talisman appeared and said, "You may take a look." The two of them took it and probed it with their divine wills, and the entire cultivation method was reflected in their minds. After looking through it, they were both satisfied. Gan Shouting cupped his hands and said, "So, we don't owe each other anything?" Hu Xian nodded and raised his hand to bow. "Both of you, farewell." Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting bowed to return the greeting. When they raised their heads again, they saw that the traveling light had already entered the sky. The two of them discussed in low voices and returned to their own sect. Outside the void sky, within a white lotus, a strand of Sima Quan's demonic will slowly woke up. After sensing for a moment, he was surprised to discover that the demonic nature that had originally occupied his body had disappeared, and he did not know where it had gone. However, the situation was not necessarily good. He had already lost contact with the clones he left on the continent. This meant that he couldn't use divine powers to teleport back, and the clones wouldn't come back to find him. It seemed like he couldn't go back with his own strength. Although this Zhuodalian was a lotus built with the soul of a heavenly abode cultivator, he didn't have the strength to transform it into a formless form. If he were to be blown by the 9 layers of astral winds, he might die halfway. However, he could still float in the virtual sky for tens or hundreds of years. At this moment, he suddenly thought of a secret story. Back then, when the West continent was prosperous, the East Flower continent was still a turbid land. There were several genuine demons occupying this place. At that time, a powerful cultivator who came from beyond the heavens wanted to capture one and refine it into a treasure. However, when he was about to make a move, he was stopped by the West continent cultivators because he was afraid that the continent would collapse. This person agreed to stop, but he didn't go back. Instead, he stayed on the 9 continents to teach his disciples. However, on the surface, he preached and made friends with others. It seemed like he didn't have such thoughts anymore. However, he never gave up on this thought. He spent thousands of years to refine a treasure. Then, he lured the genuine demon out and moved both of them into the virtual sky. However, it seemed like his plan didn't go well. It was rumored that the two of them died together. Later, there were cultivators who went to search for the treasure, but they didn't get what they wanted. If he could find it, it wouldn't be difficult for him to return to the East Flower continent. However, after tens of thousands of years, if the treasure wasn't sealed by some special method, it might have already been abandoned. However, at this moment, there was a thought in his heart that seemed to be encouraging him to do so. Since I can't go back now, I might as well give it a try and try my luck. With this thought in mind, he controlled the White Lotus and flew into the depths of the virtual sky. Chapter 94, Vanquishing Demon Heart and Entering the Virtual Sky. Chapter 1020. A month later, Hu Xian returned to Qinsang School from Dongsheng. On the same day, he was summoned by the headmaster to the upper extreme hall for a discussion, but no one knew what was said. The next day, sect leader Qin summoned all the enlightened masters of the heavenly abode to the palace. He first talked about Hu Xian's contribution in going to Dongsheng to slay the demons, and then made it clear that he would take over the position of main hall master of the Daylight Hall. Hu Xian had rendered such a great service and was the master of the side hall, so inheriting this position was a matter of course. Everyone had no objections, and after the ceremony, everyone dispersed. After Zhang Yan left the hall, he looked at the sea of clouds outside. In the past few days, he had been cultivating in the cave and refining treasures. He thought that since it was rare for him to come out, he might as well go to the Fangchen courtyard to see how far the broken pillar had been refined. He boarded the dragon chariot and descended from the floating heavenly palace. Not long after, they arrived at Fangchen's courtyard. Monastery head Su Yingtong received a disciple's report and hurriedly came out to welcome him, respectfully welcoming him in. Before the earthly fire heavenly cauldron, Zhang Yan went to the high platform and looked down. At this moment, the original appearance of the broken pillar could no longer be seen. The palaces on it were scattered, and the palaces were continuous. Green mountains and beautiful trees dotted the place. Outside, the clouds and mist lingered, and it looked like a divine palace. Su Yingtong pointed and said, "Hall Master, please take a look. The immortal pavilions on this pillar were personally built by me. Moreover, I've refined all sorts of prohibitions, so there's no mountain lock formation. As long as the spiritual opportunity is not exhausted, it can also resist the strong poisonous qi from the outer space." After Zhang Yan examined the exterior of the temple, he opened his Dharma eye and looked inside. The inside of the pillar had been hollowed out a long time ago, and there was a secret pavilion built inside. In the deepest part, there was a stone egg that flickered between light and darkness. It was connected to many spiritual veins, like blood vessels and meridians, leading to all directions. This stone egg was the heaven and earth fetus, which he had obtained from the dragon palace. It could respond to the secrets of the earth and the heavens. Borrowing qi to nourish qi, and putting the broken pillar into it to refine this strange treasure, even if it went beyond the heavens. As long as they were not too far away from the 9 continents, cultivators could also cultivate there. No less than a continent on the ground. However, it was not an easy task to link the qi formation and connect the streams everywhere. It was obvious that Su Yingtong had put in a lot of effort. He couldn't help but nod and say, "Headmaster Su is considerate." Hearing his praise, Suing Tong couldn't help smiling from ear to ear. He repeatedly waved his hand and said, I don't dare, I don't dare. How would I dare to claim credit for this? If not for the palace master bringing the heaven and earth fetus, I would not have been able to do so. This broken pillar has been nourished by spiritual opportunity. It's useless no matter how many palace prohibitions I've built. As he said this, he bowed deeply. If Hall Master can give Fangchen Courtyard some more time, I'll definitely be able to build this thing to perfection. Zhang Yan wasn't in a hurry to throw the broken pillar out into the sky, so he didn't mind. After saying a few words of praise, he left on the flood dragon under everyone's respectful farewell. After returning to the truth crossing point, he did not cultivate. Instead, he went to the pill room and sat on the jade platform. He waved his sleeves and opened the furnace. The smoke from the furnace emitted a mirage light. In the flash, there seemed to be all sorts of people appearing. It was a charming scene. He gently guided his mana. Immediately, a crystal the size of a pigeon's egg flew out from the furnace. It carried a pure flowing light with traces of stars on it. It landed on the table in front of him. This was the spiritual seed that he had borrowed from Yen Changxing's grotto heaven. It was supplemented with various treasures. The artifact that was refined was called the identification stone. When used in a fight, as long as one was skilled in controlling it, one could calculate the movement of the opponent's qi. However, to make it a true artifact, even if he was a Taoist grotto heaven, it would be hard to do without a long period of refinement. That was why this treasure was only a Xian artifact. With his mana, when he used it, it could only control a few hundred miles around him. When people fought in a Taoist grotto heaven, they could easily cross thousands of miles. The power of their mana and divine arts was not something a normal person could imagine. Not to mention that a normal talisman couldn't handle it, even if it was taken out, under the turbulence of mana, it would be destroyed in a few breaths. From this point alone, this treasure seemed to be useless. However, he didn't think so. As long as the identification stone's spiritual seed wasn't bad, it was easy to refine it. If he made 100 of them and scattered them, it would be enough to make up for this flaw. When cultivators fought, the slightest difference could decide the outcome. Even if it was worn out in one move, it would be worth it if there was a chance to win. However, he didn't need to do this himself. He could just ask the people in the palace to do it for him. Thinking up to this point, he immediately ordered someone to find Shen Nu. With a light tap of his finger, he passed a talisman down and said, "The method to forge this treasure is inside. Take it and read it carefully to see if you can forge it." Shen Nu carefully walked forward and held the talisman that was half the size of her body in front of her. After looking at it for a long time, she bowed and said, "Master, this isn't difficult. The Hall of Refining Treasures has it. It's just that the furnace fire is hard to find. Can Master lend me a few ink black flood dragons to use?" Zhang Yan said, "That is easy. I will allocate 20 flood dragons for you to use." "Is that enough?" Shen Nu calculated in her heart and said happily, "Master, it is enough." Zhang Yan smiled. He knew that this ink black flood dragon was still useful to her. However, he didn't need to think about it. He just needed to refine the treasure. He raised his sleeves and dismissed them. He turned the formation door and returned to the main hall to cultivate. Another half a month passed. A boy came and said that the upper extreme hall's side hall master, Qi Yuntian, had invited him to discuss some matters. Zhang Yan thought for a while and stopped his cultivation. He flew to the upper extreme hall like a ray of light. When he reached the boundary, he saw Qi Yuntian standing in front of the stairs to welcome him. Hu Xian was beside him. He knew that something must have happened, so he descended. Both parties greeted each other. When they reached the inner hall, they chatted for a while before returning to their seats. Qi Yuntian said, "Today, I've invited both of you here for two things. First, both halls have their own masters, so we can refine the formations of the three halls and set the rules. Do you have any objections?" There was a talisman in each of the three halls. They were all left by the great underworld master. When the three talismans merged into one, they could set up an extremely powerful nameless formation. However, this could only be done with the cooperation of the Hall Masters of the Upper Extreme Hall, the True Purification Hall, and the Daylight Hall. Zhang Yan said, "A few hundred years later, there will be a great calamity. In order to protect the sect, we must do this. When senior brother is free, let us know and we will come to refine the formation." Hu Xian knew that this must be the intention of the sect master. He agreed without hesitation and asked, "What is the second matter?" Qi Yuntian said, "I am under the order of the sect master to temporarily take charge of the sect's affairs. The most important thing is how to deal with the human calamity. This is not something I can handle alone. Do you have any suggestions?" Hu Xian was silent for a while and said, "I have something to discuss here." Qi Yuntian said seriously, "Junior brother Hua, please speak." Hu Xian said, "I think that although the sect master said that I will be the one to initiate the calamity, the person who will do it might not necessarily be me." Qi Yuntian nodded slightly and understood what he meant. Although the sect master said that he could initiate the human calamity, it would be done by the Qinsang school. It might seem like he was coercing them. However, if it was not done by the people from the Qinsang school, even if they knew the truth, there would be a layer of separation between them. It would save them some face and reduce their resistance. It was very likely that they would be able to rope in a few more allies. The East Flower continent was only so big. One more friend meant one less enemy. He looked over and said, "Since junior brother Hua said this, does it mean that you have a candidate in mind?" It was not easy to move the roots. Even with his current mana, he could not do it. However, with the help of the talisman, it was not difficult to solve the problem. It was just that if he did this, he would definitely offend all the cultivators in the world. If it was not the people from the Qinsang school, who would dare to bear the responsibility? Hu Xian said, "I will go back to Dongxing to get rid of the demons. I think there are two people who are very suitable." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Senior brother Hua, are you talking about Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting?" Hu Xian said, "It's these two. Because there are no spirit caves in the Dongxing continent, it's difficult for the two of them to cultivate. From their words, they seem to have the intention of establishing ties with our sect. We can take this opportunity to invite the two of them to our Dark Azure sect as guests, and then try to persuade them to agree to this matter." Qi Yuntian said, "Do these two people have any background?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "These two people have no contact with our Donghua mystic sect. Senior brother Hua's plan is feasible. If they agree, we can bring them to the other world." Qi Yuntian immediately made up his mind and said in a deep voice, "Junior brother Hua, after you go back, you can invite them to our sect." He did not think too much about what the two people wanted. Once they arrived at Qinsang school, it was not up to him to wait. Hu Xian nodded and agreed. Qi Yuntian turned to Zhang Yan and asked, "Junior brother Zhang, do you have anything to teach me?" Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Senior brother, you are too serious. I think, before the human tribulation, there is one thing that must be done." Qi Yuntian straightened his body slightly and said, "Junior brother, please speak." Zhang Yan said, "Among the three major sects of the mystic sect, Shaoqing and I have long formed an alliance to face the Great Tribulation together. Before this, the biggest enemy of our Qinsang school is Yuxiao. I do not count him, and he does not count me. Therefore, we cannot let it be stable. Therefore, I have a son in the South Sea, but the flower has not bloomed yet." He explained in detail how he ordered Li Xiaomi to set up a sect on the South Sea and said, back then, Yuxiao's grandmaster, Zhenren Yaohan, was omnipotent and could suppress the land of 4 continents. Master Lingye did not have such ability. When the war started, he could at most suppress the Donghua continent. But in this way, the South Cliff continent would no longer have any scruples. This continent is the core of Yuxiao School, where spiritual opportunities are hidden. When the time comes, there will be someone behind to hold them back, and it will be difficult for them to use their full strength. Qi Yuntian and Hu Xian listened and immediately identified the benefits. Supporting such a person, there was no need for him to fight with Yu Xiao. As long as he put on a posture of constantly threatening the South Cliff continent, when the Great Tribulation started, with him here, it would be enough to divide a part of the power of Yu Xiao school. Qi Yuntian praised, so junior brother has a plan. This is a good plan, but we cannot let junior brother Zhang do it alone. The elixirs and elixirs needed can be provided by the sect, and we can try to help him succeed. We can also set up a big formation to prevent Yu Xiao from attacking. Zhang Yan nodded and said, senior brother's concern is right, I can handle this matter. If Li Xiumi really became a cave with the help of Qinsang school, although Yu Xiao might not make a move now, when the tribulation came, the first thing they would think of would be to get rid of this threat from behind. Then it was necessary to set up a big formation for this sect. If the Mountain Gate big formation was guarded by a deity of Dongtian, it would be enough to last for a long time. When the tribulation started, it could not only share a part of the burden for Qinsang school, but also take this opportunity to deplete the mana of the deities of Yu Xiao. Chapter 1021. The three of them discussed for several hours in the upper extreme hall. After finalizing their plans, Zhang Yan and Hu Xian took their leave. Outside the hall, Hu Xian said, I heard from junior brother that Li Xiumi, the successor of the Longevity Monastery, is talented and talented. If he can be nurtured, he can be a good chess piece. However, even though I have reached this stage, I still feel that this path is not easy. Everything I have experienced is like a thin piece of ice on a single tree. He has no master and no spiritual cave to cultivate. Will he be able to succeed? It was extremely difficult to form a grotto heaven. Even with the support of the sect, he felt that the slightest mistake would cause all his previous efforts to be wasted. Li Xiumi was just a wandering cultivator. Even with the West Continent's inheritance, it would be difficult for him to reach this stage. It was not that he did not care about this person. What he did not understand was, if this person could not reach this stage, then wouldn't Zhang Yan's previous arrangements be in vain? Zhang Yan smiled, I have a backup plan for this matter. I will not put all my eggs in one basket. Li Xiumi obtained the grotto heaven created by the predecessors and gathered a group of South Sea cultivators who escaped from the South Cliff continent to establish a sect. With this karma, it was perfectly justifiable for him to pick a fight with Yu Xiao. Therefore, he was the most suitable candidate. But taking a step back, even if this person could not be nurtured, when the time comes, he could hire someone else to guard Feng Hill Pass. For example, Tao Jinren was a suitable candidate. Hu Xian said, so junior brother already has a plan. I was thinking too much. I need to make a trip to Dongsheng. Do you have a letter to bring to Hanyuan sect? Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, senior brother, have you ever thought that if you invite them for no reason, they will be suspicious? If they fight because they are unwilling, even if senior brother has the real treasure, it will damage your cultivation. It will not be worth it. Hu Xian looked at him and said, junior brother, do you have any ideas? Zhang Yan smiled, if brother Hua is not suspicious, you can leave this matter to my disciple in Dongshan continent. Within a month, we will know the result. If it does not work, it will not be too late for senior brother to do it. Hu Xian also smiled and said, junior brother, I've also seen that disciple of yours. He's indeed extraordinary. Since that's the case, I'll save myself some trouble and wait for your reply in the hall. The two of them exchanged a few more words. Then, they parted ways. Zhang Yan returned to the Duzhen Hall and sat down. He picked up a brush and wrote 2 flying letters. With another flick of his finger, one of the letters flew up and disappeared into the sky like a rainbow. He then said, tell Zhang Chan to come here. A moment later, a strange insect with 16 pairs of wings flew in and landed on the ground, turning into a young man with a pale complexion. He knelt down and kowtowed, Master, I'm here. Zhang Yan glanced at him and asked, how's your cultivation recently? Zhang Chan said, under Master's care, I have already mastered several kinds of demon-subduing divine arts. Zhang Yan nodded his head and pointed to the table, saying, I won't be testing you. Take this letter to Zihong's office. Also, Take this box of pills as well. Don't hand it over to him personally. After this, you will stay with him and listen to his instructions. Zhang Chan bowed and accepted the order. He came up to receive the letter, kowtowed again and said, Laoi, this lowly one will definitely deliver it safely, there won't be any delay. Finished speaking, he retreated several steps. He turned around and left the hall. Yuxiao School, inside the heavenly abode of the Ministry of Defense, Zhou Ruiying gently waved his sleeves, opened the mirror light, and waited for a part of the light to transform into a shadow. He said, Has Shi Xiang heard any news recently? The figure thought for a moment and said, Junior Martial Sister, are you talking about the heavenly demon? I heard that this demon went to the Dongshan continent and swallowed the spiritual soul of a grotto heaven cultivator. This is the time when he is arrogant. If this demon comes back, he will bring disaster to Donghua sooner or later. It is a good thing that Huxian can kill this demon. Even if there are some clones that have not been eliminated, they will not be able to do anything for a while. Zhou Ruiying shook his head and said, What does the sky demon have to do with me? This is not what I am talking about. The figure immediately understood what she meant and said, Junior Martial Sister, are you talking about that Huxian? Qinsang School is indeed strong and has deep roots. Even after suffering such a heavy setback hundreds of years ago, not only has it recovered, it is even better than before. Zhou Ruiying said solemnly, Senior Martial Brother, you and I both understand that the more people we have in the Xianmen Grotto Heaven, the more combat power we have. There are actually as many as 13 Jinren Grotto Heaven in Qinsang School. If it was the previous generation, even if the sect could provide for them, they would have stopped a long time ago, unlike now where there is no intention to stop. What is he trying to do? The figure said, Junior Martial Sister, are you afraid that if this continues, it will be disadvantageous to Yuxiao? Zhou Ruiying frowned and said, Senior Martial Brother, don't take it to heart. Ever since the fourth headmaster of Qinsang School, they have always disagreed with our sect. Even though Qin Gang has changed a little, it is only because he wants to use Yuya to pacify the North Underworld continent. It is hard to say what he will do when the calamity comes. The figure did not speak and seemed to be thinking. Zhou Ruiying stood up and paced a few steps with the dressing table on her back. She then turned back and said, Jinren Wu once said that when the sects were discussing in the palace, because no one agreed for me, it was difficult for him to go against the will of the people, but he suffered a great loss. I think this is because Yu Xiao lives in the south and does not interact with the sections. I heard that Qinsang School has been getting closer to Lishan and Huanjin recently. These two sects originally did not have a good relationship with them, but they suddenly became close. It must be because they want to rope us in. I should use some tricks, even if I can't win over these two sects, I will try to ruin this matter. The figure said, Then Junior Apprentice Sister called me here, do you have an idea? Zhou Ruiying said, Although I have some ideas, I still need Senior Apprentice Brother's advice. The figure said, Just say it. Zhou Ruiying secretly said with hatred, according to the sect's report, Lishan had sent a few disciples to help Wei Zihong on the Fengling Ocean. If we can find a way to get rid of one or two of them, it will destroy the relationship between the two sections. The figure laughed and said, So Junior Apprentice Sister still remembers this matter. Zhou Ruiying gritted her teeth and said, Junior Apprentice Sister destroyed my body, how can I forget? The figure thought for a while and said, I also heard that there is a junior with the surname Li. Recently, he has started a sect on the ocean, called Yan Zhongguan. It has gathered the remnants of the southern cliff and is quite powerful. If these few people go together, it is true that we must guard against them. But if we attack them, they will definitely be prepared, and we may become a target. Zhou Ruiying said, May I ask Senior Apprentice Brother, what should we do? The figure laughed and said, There is no need for us to do it, but there is a suitable person in front of us. Who is it? The figure whispered a few words, and Zhou Ruiying listened to it. She nodded and said happily, Although it is a little risky, it is not a bad plan. We will do as Senior Apprentice Brother says. Dongshan Continent, in the Deep Abyss sect, Fu Baoxing read the letter sent by Zhang Yan. The intention of the letter was to ask him to find a way to invite Gan and Ji to Donghua continent. After reading it, he thought for a long time and said, "Someone, bring me the letter from Shaotsung realm asking for help." Immediately, a boy presented a letter to him. He took it, flipped it a few times, and carefully kept it in his sleeve. As early as when Shaotsung realm was besieged, the realm master Wei Shuling had already sent a letter asking for help. However, because it involved the two Taoist grotto heavens, he could not do anything. Moreover, the relationship between them had not reached that point yet. Back then, when Zhang Yan asked him to help in battle, he also gave him a lot of benefits. Even when Wei Shuling lost an arm, it was only because of the medicinal pills given by Zhang Yan that she was able to reattach it. Therefore, after informing the sect, he put it on the shelf and ignored it. But now it was useful. He wrote 2 letters personally and ordered people to send them to the heads of Fengxiang Sword School and Qingxian sect respectively. After a little more than 10 days, he went to the riverside and quietly waited. One day later, he saw 2 bamboo talismans flying down from the sky and landed in front of him. Then, 2 shadows came out from the talismans. About 10 days later, he arrived at the riverbank and quietly waited. One day later, he saw 2 bamboo talismans fly down from the sky and land in front of him. Then, 2 shadows leapt out from the talismans and turned into shadows. Knowing that the 2 enlightened masters had arrived, he cupped his hands in greeting and said, "I'm Fu Baoxing, the head of the Deep Abyss sect. Greetings to the 2 enlightened masters." Gan Shouting said calmly, "Sect leader Fu, you don't have to be so courteous. Since you invited us here, does Jinren Zhang have any advice for us?" Although Fu Baoxing was not the Taoist master of Dongtian, he was Zhang Yan's disciple after all. He did not want to offend him, so he was still polite. If it weren't for this reason, a mere Yuanying cultivator wouldn't be worth their attention. Fu Baoxing took out the letter from Shaotsang Jing and waved it in front of the 2 of them. He said, "After I receive this letter, I will make a copy of this letter and send it to my benevolent teacher. Benevolent teacher has sent a letter recently and asked me to ask the 2 of you, is there such a matter?" When Ji Xiangping saw the contents of the letter, he panicked and said, "There is such a matter," but Fu Baoxing did not wait for him to finish and chuckled. He said, "The 2 enlightened masters should know that my benevolent teacher has some friendship with Territory Lord Wei. Back then, when my benevolent teacher came to Dongsheng to recruit people, Territory Lord Wei was the one who responded. Since she came to ask for help, my benevolent teacher had no choice but to ask about this matter due to their old friendship." Gan Shouting said, "I'm afraid Jinren Zhang has misunderstood. This is just Jinren Wei's side of the story. The truth is not as it is in the letter." Fu Baoxing said, "This matter is not something I can ask about. My benevolent teacher wants to invite the 2 of you to the mountain gate for a chat. I will be returning to Donghua next month. If the 2 enlightened masters are interested, why don't we go together?" When he finished, he bowed to the 2 of them and said goodbye. He turned away from the flying carriage and flew into the clouds. Gan Shouting asked, "Taoist Ji, can you tell what this Jinren Zhang wants?" Ji Xiangping thought about it and shook his head. He said, "It doesn't seem like he's here to question us. If that's the case, how could it be so easy? I thought that he must have seen Jinren Hui getting the elixir jade and was jealous, so he wanted to ask for it. Fortunately, we've kept a portion for ourselves, so we can send it to him." Gan Shouting frowned. But he could have left this matter to his disciple. Why does he want us to go to Donghua continent? Is it really for this matter? Ji Xiangping sighed. "Even if it's a trap, we have to go. Did you forget about what happened to Zheng Weixing?" Gan Shouting was silent. When Shen Baishuang came to Dongsheng, he immediately injured Zheng Weixing to the point of death. He still had fear in his heart. He still remembered that the old demon Luomengza was forced by Zhang Yan to retreat to the sea and did not dare to take another step south. Not long ago, he saw Hu Xian's prowess and killed the skyscraping demon in the sky. All 3 of them had strong mana. Even if the 2 of them worked together, they might not be able to defeat one of them. He said in a low voice, "Taoist brother is right. If we don't go, we will be the target. Let's make some preparations and go to Donghua continent with Fu Baoxing another day. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 1022. On the sea-viewing platform of the Hanyuan sect, the rain was heavy, and the sound of mountains and rivers could be heard. Below the platform, the sea was turbulent, making people suspect that the whirlpool from hundreds of years ago was coming again. After Fu Baoxing returned from the Tianhui mountain, everything in the sect had been arranged properly. Today was the day of departure for Donghua. Although it was not time yet, the disciples were already waiting in front of the stairs. The second disciple, Wang Gufeng, suddenly said loudly, "On the day of departure, there is too much rain. Let me melt it." As he said this, he cast a spell to make the rain fall. The eldest disciple, Long Huaishan, reached out to stop him and shook his head, saying, "The wind, rain, thunder, and lightning are the work of nature. It does not change because of human emotions. Junior brother, why bother?" When Wang Gufeng heard this, he immediately stopped and bowed, saying, "It is my fault." Long Huaishan saw that he was so respectful and unusual. He was stunned for a moment before he realized it and looked at him deeply. This junior brother's cultivation had been improving day by day, and he even had the momentum of catching up. His reputation in the sect had been getting louder and louder. He must have known that he was going to be the leader of the sect and purposely acted this way in front of his fellow disciples to show that he was willing to take a lower position. At this moment, a disciple suddenly shouted, "Master is here." Everyone looked over and saw Fu Baoxing, dressed in a Taoist robe and holding a horsetail whisk, riding a flying carriage. They quickly bowed and paid their respects. Fu Baoxing came from the sea-viewing platform. Looking at the surging waves, he thought that he might not have the chance to return, so he called the 23 disciples in front of him to talk and gave them artifacts and pills. The disciples had been cultivating with him since they were young. After hundreds of years together, they were deeply indebted to him. Seeing that he was about to leave, they were all reluctant. A few of the female disciples even cried secretly. Fu Baoxing sighed, "I am going to cultivate at your grandmaster's place." "This is a good thing, why are you all acting like this?" A disciple suddenly asked, "Master, can we go to Donghua in the future?" Fu Baoxing said, "Donghua is not like Dongsheng. There are many talented people everywhere. If you are not good enough, don't embarrass me." All the disciples understood in their hearts. Their own master said this to tell them to cultivate well and not to slack off. But even so, there were still thoughts of not admitting defeat in their hearts. A few disciples secretly decided to go into seclusion when they got back. They would cultivate wholeheartedly, but they might not be weaker than their peers in the upper sect. Half an hour later, Fu Baoxing finished explaining. Escorted by the disciples, they arrived in front of a large ship. He borrowed Zhang Yan's earthly fire heavenly furnace, which took him nearly 100 years to refine. It was originally for the convenience of his fellow disciples to cross the ocean, but he did not expect that he would be the first to use it. He turned his head to look towards the south, but did not see any movement. After thinking for a while, he decided not to wait any longer and turned around to board the boat. Suddenly he heard a dragon's roar from overseas. He knew it was the siren coming to see him off. He stopped in his tracks and bowed to Zhengzhongbei. Then, he flicked his sleeves and quickly boarded the boat without turning back. The disciples at the back all knelt down as they stared at the huge ship. They rode on the clouds and left the mountain gate of Hanyuan, heading west. The sea ship traveled for half a month and arrived above the Seymour Ocean boundary. Fu Baoxing was about to cross 10,000 miles of thunderclouds. Suddenly, a rainbow flew over from the sky and actually split the dark clouds in the middle. Then, a clear light slowly shone down. He seemed to have expected it and was not surprised. Instead, he stood up and bowed to the sky, saying, "Are the two perfected ones here? Greetings, little Taoist." In a flash, two rainbow lights landed on the big ship. Strong winds surged and pushed away the seawater below. Two people walked out from the light. Their Taoist robes fluttered and they each held an artifact in their hands. They were Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting, the two grotto heaven cultivators. Gan Shouting said, "The two of us went back and discussed it. We decided to go with you to East Flower." Fu Baoxing bowed and said, "To be able to invite the two of you to the upper sect, I am extremely happy." Ji Xiangping said coldly, "You can't invite the two of us. This time, we are just giving face to perfected Zhang." Fu Baoxing smiled to himself. He also knew that the two of them said they were invited, but in reality, they were forced by their own master. It was inevitable that they would be dissatisfied. However, he did not know that this was also because Ji and Gan did not want to fall into the path of emotionlessness, so they had recently rebuilt their emotions. Otherwise, no matter how the outside world changed, their hearts would still be like dead water and would not be stirred up even the slightest ripple. After the two of them found a seat on the ship and sat down, Gan Shouting looked at the waves in front and said, "Sect leader Fu, although this ship is good, it is too slow. To reach East Flower Continent, it will probably take a year and a half. Why don't I cast a spell and send you there?" When Fu Baoxing heard this, he hurriedly said, "Please wait." He took out 2 elixirs from his sleeve pocket and said, "Our East Flower Mystic Sect is in a fierce battle with the Devil Doctrine. Both of you are from other continents, and along the way, you will have to pass by the Carp Tribe and Chongyue True Temple. If there are any misunderstandings, it will not be good. These are the elixirs given by my master, they can help the two of you to conceal your qi dynamic." Ji Xiangping snorted. After all, he was the perfected Dongtian. He was very unhappy that he was being secretive. However, when he thought that the strange and unpredictable heavenly demons seemed to be related to the East Flower demonic sect, he was also very afraid. No matter how unwilling he was, he had to take it. He examined the pill for a moment, but didn't swallow it. Instead, he grabbed it with his hand, and it turned into powder that sprinkled down. But before it fell to the ground, smoke suddenly rose up and turned into a thin layer of dust that wrapped around his body. At this moment, he felt that his body seemed to be separated from heaven and earth. He could not help but click his tongue in wonder. After pondering for a moment, he actually had some understanding. Compared to him, Gan Shouting was much more straightforward. This person had already seen through the situation. Without saying anything, he directly took the pill and crushed it between his 2 fingers, covering himself with a robe of dust. Then, he formed a hand seal and the ship, under his control, emitted boundless light. Suddenly, it leapt forward, like a flickering light passing by, and flew towards the horizon. With the help of his mana, the speed of the boat was extremely fast. After about 60 days, they successfully arrived at the upper end of the East Sea. At this moment, the two of them slowed down the boat. Just as they were hesitating whether to go straight to the continent or send someone to inform them first, suddenly, there was a ray of spiritual light in front of them. It actually turned into a stream of water in front of the boat and carried the sea boat to the north. Fu Baoxing pretended to be listening attentively as if someone was talking to him. After a while, he turned around and saluted, "Two Zenrins, this is Master's guidance with the sect's formation power to bring us to the mountain gate." Just as Ji Xiangping was about to speak, she seemed to have sensed something and suddenly looked up. Gan Shouting, who was originally sitting in the boat, suddenly stood up as well. Both of their eyes were filled with shock. In the sky above Donghua continent, clear air filled the air and spiritual vigor shot up to the sky. It looked like it covered the sun and the sky, but unfortunately, it was covered by the clear light and they could not see the actual situation. And where Qinsang School was located, there were actually more than 10 grand spiritual vigor that connected the sky and the earth. Ji Xiangping asked in a daze, "Sect leader Fu, how many Zenrins are there in Qinsang School?" Fu Baoxing said, "In our Qinsang upper sect, under the sect leader, there are a total of 13 Dongtian Zenrins." Ji Xiangping and Gan Shouting had previously guessed that there were many cultivators in Qinsang School, about 5 or 6. Now that they heard that there were actually 13 of them, they were both shocked and looked at each other in fear. Ji Xiangping thought to herself, "I heard that Qinsang School is one of the 3 major sects in Donghua. If that's the case, the other 2 sects should not be any weaker than this." Not to mention, there are also people from the devil's doctrine who have been enemies with Xianmen for more than 10,000 years. I didn't expect the Donghua cultivators to be so strong. Gan Shouting, on the other hand, felt lucky. If he did not come here by invitation, it was hard to say if the other party would not use any tricks. With just the two of them, how could they resist? And he also noticed one thing. The closer they got to Qinsang school, the more spiritual vigor he felt. He thought that perhaps coming here was the right choice. The boat followed the river, and not long after, they arrived at a small world. Gan Shouting looked around and saw that this place was filled with mountain ranges and winding rivers. Although it was daytime, there was no light from the sun or moon. He asked, "Where is this place?" Just now, Fu Baoxing had already gotten the hint, so he said calmly, "This place is called Small Rain World. It is a small world specially opened by the ancestors of Qinsang to entertain guests like you two Zenrens." When the two of them heard this, they were even more shocked. This Qinsang school was indeed powerful, they even had a small world to entertain guests. Their tone was much more polite. Ji Xiangping said, "Sect leader Fu, when will Zhenren Zhang meet us?" Fu Baoxing said, "I don't know about that. But later on, Zhenren Zhang and his disciple have not met for a long time. I think he has something to say. It is not the way of a guest for us to delay him." Gan Shouting said, "Daoist brother Ji, Zhenren Zhang and his disciple have not seen each other for a long time. It is not the way of a guest for us to delay him." Ji Xiangping did not think too much about it and said, "When sect leader Fu meets Zhenren Zhang, please send our regards." Fu Baoxing said yes and sent the two of them to a guest house to settle down. He then said goodbye and left. Gan Shouting stood on top of the attic and looked at the verdant green mountains outside. He said, "This place is full of spiritual vigor, the scenery of the mountains and rivers is beautiful. Just now when I breathed in and out, I felt that my cultivation has improved. This is a good place." Ji Xiangping laughed and said, "We crossed the ocean and were also afraid. This time, we will return with some benefits." Gan Shouting nodded and agreed. They went back to their beds to meditate. However, the two of them did not know that other than the beautiful scenery, the spiritual vigor in this world was not strong. It could not be compared to other grotto heavens. It was only slightly better than places like Dongshan continent that did not have spiritual points. Especially the small rain world, which was originally used to imprison people like the small cold world. Once they entered this world, it would be extremely difficult for them to leave. Above the floating heavenly palace, Zhang Yan and Hu Xian stared at the Milky Way and connected the big boat into the formation. When it completely entered the small world, Hu Xian said, "Junior brother Zhang's prediction is very accurate. The two of them really came to us. Now that it is done, I wonder when we will make the next move." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There is no rush. Let them stay in the small rain world for a period of time and ignore them. We will make further plans after the sect comes to an agreement." Hu Xian nodded and thought for a while. He said, "If the two of them leave Dongshan continent, there will be no more grotto heavens guarding this continent. If they leave for a long time, will the old demon Luomengzi take the opportunity to invade this continent?" He originally planned to force the two of them to sign the contract and then let them go. However, looking at Zhang Yan's intention, he wanted to imprison them here. In that case, he had to worry about Dongshan continent. Zhang Yan said calmly, "The demon division is not on the same side as us. If he dares to make a move, we will have an excuse to get rid of him so that he will not have to do anything when the calamity comes." Chapter 1023. When Zhang Yan returned to the Crossing Truth Hall, Fu Baoxing was already waiting there. When he saw Zhang Yan, he hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "Disciple kowtows in salute to Master, and wishes Master a long life." Zhang Yan said, "Disciple, please stand up and speak." Fu Baoxing acknowledged and stood up respectfully with his hands by his side. Zhang Yan smiled, "You did well this time and you have been victorious in East Mountain for a long time. You have taught your disciple and your merit is not small. The usual rewards are not enough, so I will allow you to build a hut outside the true purification hall to cultivate." Fu Baoxing was overjoyed. He was originally not far from the third stage realm, and if he could have a place, he would undoubtedly be able to cultivate to this realm faster. He immediately kowtowed again. Zhang Yan called him up and said, "I have also left a cave abode for you in the clear nether heavenly lake. You can settle it however you want." Fu Baoxing thought about it and didn't reject it. Although he might not need it, with this cave abode, he would be considered to have a foothold in the clear nether sect and wouldn't be seen as an outsider by his fellow sect members. And if any disciple came to East Flower in the future, he would have a place to settle down. Zhang Yan remembered that he was working hard to maintain the sect in another continent and it wasn't easy, so he specially spent half a day to guide him and even allowed him to come and seek guidance once a month. Finally, he gave him a talisman and said, "You have just arrived at the mountain and everything is new to you. If there are any inconveniences, you can use this talisman to call for the servants in the hall." Fu Baoxing received it with both hands and bowed before leaving the hall. The elders outside the hall knew that he was the hall master's disciple, and when they saw him coming out, they all came up to greet him. Their words were even polite. He had been in charge of a sect for a long time and didn't lose his dignified demeanor. This caused the elders to nod their heads silently. After Fu Baoxing greeted the elders, he went to the side and waved the talisman. He heard the sound of a golden bell ringing in his ear. After a while, a petite little girl who was only half a foot tall came out of the hall. She stood on a cloud of green smoke and bowed, "Greetings, Jinren Fu. Your servant Shin is here. May I know what instructions do you have for me?" Fu Baoxing looked at her. She said, "Master allowed me to build a hut and cultivate here. It's just that I've just arrived here and I don't know many of the rules here. I would like to consult this lady." Shin Nu hurriedly said, "I don't dare. Reverend can just call me Shin Nu. As for those rules, they are only used to restrain the elders." Perfected Fu was the hall master's disciple. There's no need to guard it. Fu Baoxing, however, insisted that she repeat it once and memorized it in his heart. He then said, "Right now, I need to visit my fellow sect members. As for the matter of building the hut, I'll have to ask Shin Nu to do it on my behalf." Shin Nu said, "This is my job. I will finish it before sunset." "Don't worry, Reverend." Fu Baoxing thought to himself, "Since that's the case, I'll visit my fellow sect members first." Eldest senior sister and second senior brother had been cultivating here since their seclusion. Since they rarely come out, it's inconvenient to disturb them. However, I have to visit the 2 senior sisters and the few senior brothers who are cultivating outside the sect. Before I enter the hall, I'll visit them one by one. After he made up his mind, he turned around and used the talisman to protect himself. He broke through the clouds and went down the floating celestial palace towards the clear nether heavenly lake. Zhang Yan had already reached the main hall and sat on the jade platform. He first nourished the heaven and earth leaf and then breathed in and out spiritual opportunity. When he woke up from his meditation, it was already 3 months later. He first found someone to ask about Xiang Ping and Gan Shouting. He heard that they were still at the same place and had no intention of leaving. They also didn't take the initiative to leave and just stayed in seclusion every day to breathe in spiritual opportunity. He smiled. This was for the best. However, he didn't take advantage of them for nothing. It was just that it wasn't a critical moment yet. After dismissing the servants, he checked his cultivation. There were no obstacles between the first and second levels of the Tao Master. As long as he had enough accumulation, he could go up to this level. The only difficulty was the amount of spiritual opportunity. A normal Tao Master could achieve it in 400 to 500 years. However, if he had enough spiritual opportunity, it wouldn't be difficult for him to achieve it 100 years earlier. The Hall of Du Zhen was located in the floating celestial palace. It was close to the spiritual eye and the spiritual opportunity it received was far better than the other sections. Moreover, his attainment of Tao Master was not only compatible with heaven and earth, but the spiritual opportunity he breathed in was also higher than all the other Taoists. With his current progress, he could enter the second level in 1 to 2 to 300 years. By then, he could find a way to open up a Dao master. If he fought with someone, even if the situation was unfavorable, he could retreat anytime. It was like having a backup plan. In the extreme north of the North Nether Continent, in the Lord of Origin Palace, the demon Lord Ji Wang held a letter in his hand. He frowned as he read it. He paced back and forth without saying a word. The chamberlain asked softly, "Is the king still unable to make a decision?" Ji Wang sighed, "Chamberlain, you know that the imperial court has spent thousands of years to accumulate some resources. If Li Xiaomi is a reliable person like what the letter says, then it's fine. However, if he entrusted the wrong person to the wrong person, then all our efforts will be wasted." The chamberlain said, "The evaluation of Li Xiaomi came from Chu Ho. This person is truly capable." Ji Wang touched the broken horn hanging on his waist. This was left behind by Ji Wuwang. It was passed down from generation to generation in the Ji family. He wanted to use this to rope in Chu Yu and Luo Mengzi so that they could return to the North Nether Continent and suppress the ape and bat tribes. Previously, he specially ordered the chamberlain to search for the two tribes. However, due to the long journey and the obstruction of the thunderclouds, he could not reach the Python tribe. He only saw Chu Yu, but the latter sent the broken horn back. It was obvious that he was not willing to follow the imperial edict. He could not help but feel disappointed in him. At the same time, he felt resentful. He scoffed and said, "Chu Ho's words cannot be trusted completely." The chamberlain said, "Seeing is believing. I am willing to go to the South Sea to share the master's worries." Ji Wang said in shock, "You just now you have returned from outside and you are going out again. If Li Ho finds out, it will be disadvantageous to you." The chamberlain knelt on the ground and cried, "Thank you for your concern. I am extremely terrified. However, this is a rare opportunity and we cannot miss it. According to Chu Ho, that Li Xiaomi has a high chance of becoming a grotto heaven. He is a half-demon and also a citizen of your majesty. If we can recruit him before this, he will definitely be a strong support for the imperial court. At that time, with this person and Luo Ho and Yan Ho together, it will be enough to suppress Li Ho and Yan Ho. With such power, even that Qinsong will not dare to belittle me. Then we can slowly plan and the rise of the ancestral court is within reach." Ji Wang's heart was stirred by his words and his face turned red. He personally helped him up and said, "Good, good. Great Chamberlain, I will order you to be the special envoy to recruit that Li Xiaomi." The chamberlain bowed again and said, "That Li Xiaomi is a wild demon and has been blessed by your majesty. I am afraid it will be difficult to persuade him with empty words." Ji Wang said, "Great Chamberlain can bring my savings and allow him to be a marquis. Also, allow him to start his own division. As long as he becomes a grotto heaven, he will be on the same level as the marquises under the imperial court. He will enjoy food from all directions and control the demons on the sea. He will not have to pay homage and will forever guard the South Sea." The chamberlain said, "Your Majesty, this title of nobility is just an empty title. I feel that this is not enough." Ji Wang asked doubtfully, "What else do you want?" The chamberlain did not speak and only took a look at the broken horn on his waist before quickly lowering his head again. Ji Wang was a little hesitant. If this item was given to Chu Yu and Luo Mengzi, he would be willing to give it to them. However, that Li Xiaomi was still an outsider and his cultivation had not reached that stage. It would be inappropriate to hand it over to him. The chamberlain kowtowed heavily and said, "Your Majesty, do not place too much importance on it. It is hard to be moved." Ji Wang sighed and said, "If I cannot revive the ancestral court, what is the use of this item in my hands?" He lifted his sleeves to cover his face and sent the broken horn out. "Great Chamberlain, take it." A hint of joy appeared in the chamberlain's eyes and he went forward to take it. He carefully placed it in his sleeves and said, "Your Majesty, this journey is not peaceful and the Fengling Ocean is surrounded by evil winds. It is extremely difficult to cross. Back then, even Yuxiao School was blocked at the door. Can the two generals assign Shuaya and Lang to this servant service? That way, Li Xiaomi will not look down on the martial might of the imperial court. Ji Wang's expression showed hesitation again. The chamberlain said that these two people were at the fourth stage of strength transformation. They had been by his side since young and were the most loyal. Because of the pressure from Marquis Li and Marquis Yan, there were not many demon generals like them in the ancestral court now. Now that he was asking for two of them, he was extremely reluctant. The chamberlain lowered his head and knelt there, not persuading him. Ji Wang thought for a long time and felt that since he had already given the broken horn, there was no need for these two people. He gritted his teeth and said, I will assign these two generals to the great chamberlain. You can also go to the palace and pick any two divine weapons to use as protection. Since the Qinsang expedition to the north, the original 8 demon cultivators mostly changed to Qi path, so there were many divine weapons left. There were even 1 or 2 that were used by Ji Wuwang and his son. However, no one could use them normally and could only be used for ceremonial purposes. The chamberlain bowed heavily and said loudly, Your Majesty is wise. Ji Wang seemed to be extremely tired and waved his hand weakly. He said, The token is on the table, go and get it yourself. The eunuch retreated and took the command talisman from the table. He then turned around and left the hall. He went to the palace of guards and lit up the 2 of them. He then went to the armory and took out several divine weapons. He did not stay for even a moment longer and left. The 2 demon generals did not say a word and followed closely behind. Outside, he looked down from the peak of the mountain and saw a sea of ice and snow. He let out a breath of cold air and turned back to look at the towering palace. However, there was a silent sneer on his face. The demon court was already half a sinking boat, how could it possibly be revived? Not long ago, he heard that the Qinsang school had gained another heavenly abode. Even when the 8 divisions were at their peak, they were not his match, let alone now. Only Ji Wang, who had grown up in the palace, would still have the beautiful dream of reviving the demon court. He pinched the broken horn in his sleeve. As long as he did what the Yuxiao school told him to do, he would be able to enjoy peace and prosperity in the future. He would not have to live in fear every day. Thinking of this, he felt a fire in his heart. He called out to the 2 demon generals, Let's go. Because he had sneaked out once before, he was much more relaxed this time. In order to avoid the eyes and ears of the ape and bat tribes, the 3 of them used an instrument and swam around the extreme North Sea. It took them a year to get out of the North Underworld continent. After arriving at the East Sea, they went south along the coast. After another 2 years, they finally arrived at the Fengling Ocean.